And I will read the statement. This regularly scheduled meeting of the Engineer Committee of the Board of Architectural and Engineering Examiners is taking place in Room 1B of the Davy Crockett Tower at 500 James Robertson Parkway in Nashville, Tennessee. And notice of this committee meeting was posted on the board website on May 22nd, 2017. Go Predators. I'd like to welcome.
Don't forget roll call.
Oh, yes, I'll do that. I'd like to do roll call now, and then we'll introduce our guests.
All right, I'll do it. Ricky Bursai, Robert Campbell, present. Stephen King,
Here.
Philip Lynn, Laura Reinbold,
Present.
Catherine Ware.
Here.
You have a quorum.
We've got several guests today. We've got people who are always with us that if y'all would make sure you say hello, introduce yourselves again for those who are.
Hi, members of the committee. I'm Sarah Page, and I'm going to be serving temporarily today as the program attorney. Liz Goldstein is out of the country at a wedding, but if there's any questions, I'll be here for you.
To be taking the place of Matt Reddish. We're just switching off on some boards, so if there's anything I can do to help you, just let me know.
Welcome. Thank you. Assistant Commissioner.
Hey, said hello to most of you already. I'm Carter Lawrence. I'm the relatively new Assistant Commissioner. Took over from Brian McCormack after he was promoted up to Deputy Commissioner. So excited to meet all of you and to be working with you.
Me? Casey Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Tennessee, ACEC Tennessee, and the Tennessee Society of Professional Engineers.
Oh, yes, Roy Shrewsbury. I'm with NCAAS. I'm a board member. I'm also the Vice President of the Northeast Zone, and thank you for allowing me to be here with you.
Ron had started talking to us about a year ago of somebody from NCAAS coming to visit, so we're glad you're here. And a good look at what we do. All right, in the interest of your time, Assistant Commissioner, we'd like to go ahead and start with you, if that's okay. And I know that Assistant Commissioner Lawrence would like to talk to us a little bit about decoupling.
Thank you very much. So I would say I have less on the comment side and more on the question side. John explained to me decoupling broadly and talked about the applicability to some of the other professions, and I inquired about decoupling from the engineering side and why that had not happened yet. Broadly raised the question, and he said, well, it's something that had been discussed. So I wanted to raise the issue with you and ask where you as a board are in thinking about the issue, what there is yet to be considered, what process-wise you would need, and what support-wise you might need from us as well. So unfortunately, I'm coming more with questions rather than answers, but just wanted to find out from all of you about that. Fantastic. Let's learn together.
That's right, we may all learn.
And make sure you speak into the microphones. Just a reminder.
Robert's been doing this longer than I have.
I'll go.
Robert can go.
All right.
I'll add anything at the end that we.
Yeah, add most of it probably because I'm probably gonna ramble a little bit. But decoupling is something, like they said, that we've been discussing for a while. I think probably Nevada was probably the first state, and there may have been another one that had been doing decoupling for a while, where they allowed people to applicants to take the test and then gain their 4 years of experience. We've got two views that are kind of there. The first, as a board, we think that the decoupling is probably something that is inevitable at some point in time. But since it is relatively new and the data is not very well fleshed out, we would like for other states to kind of make mistakes first and not put our registrants at risk or our citizens at risk because there was something in there that we may not have seen. Now that's one part of that. The second thing is there is an anticipation that it will improve licensure because you'll be taking the test fairly soon out of school. And so that leads us to the test being more of an academic exercise than a practitioner exercise, which we don't disagree with. However, what's interesting to note is that, again, the statistics that we do have available show that passage rates between the 3 and 5 year period are very much the norm. Very low passage rates 1 year 1 and 2, and very low passage rates years 5 and on. So it's a bell curve that peaks pretty easily within that 3 to 5 year period. So while we think that it's something that's there are certain engineering groups that it may be easier for them to take that test earlier because the amount of reference materials, the amount of things that they would have to have are probably less. There are some that frankly use more reference materials. Reference materials change quicker. That probably would benefit from waiting a while to take it, because ultimately we want people to pass it when they take it. We don't want them just to take it. We don't want to set up a false expectation that, oh, you take the test, it's easy, you can come right out of school, because while the impression is that it's an academic test, there are practitioner parts to it that you have to know what you're doing. And if you don't, then and you don't want to have somebody who goes and takes it 1, 2, 3 times and just gets frustrated with it because they've not gotten the information they need to be able to successfully pass the test. So we're struggling back for the flip side, the other argument, contra argument, is that you do see people change their area of expertise from the time they get out of school to their first job, second job. So you see somebody with a concentration maybe in roadway design that becomes an environmental water sewer. I'm speaking more from my background, but you see a lot of that. People go in school and they've got a really great professor, or the school they're at has a really good transportation department, for instance, and they all go, oh, we're going to be transportation people. And then they get out in the real world, they find their first job, they get involved in some other aspect of, in our case, civil engineering, and now all of a sudden they go down a different path. So the person that would take the test right out of school, and I'll just use the example for transportation, would take it with a concentration in transportation, but may really practice in environmental or some other facet down the road. So are we really, by them taking the test, what are we doing? I mean, are we just making them take a test for the sake of it, or are we helping that be a barrier, or not a barrier is the right word, but a guarantee that we are helping to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the people? Because if you move on, then what have you been tested on? And so, again, I think generally we're okay with it. We see the states around us going to it. I think Kentucky, South Carolina, is Mississippi one of them, or have they gone yet? I can't remember. But anyway, or is Alabama or Georgia? One of them have been discussing it, if not there. Some of the largest ones, I think Texas has or going. So you start to see a lot of the dominoes fall, but we still have some reservations. It puts the experience back to where that's critically important. And so what you end up with is you may have somebody that passes the test but never gets the experience that they need for us to sufficiently say you're capable of practicing as an engineer. So how does that come down? I mean, does that come down where we just keep saying, well, I know you've passed the test, but oh, by the way, your experience is horrible, okay? And we keep getting into that loop. Well, then that becomes, at some point in time, either lack of confidence in the board, or they get to the right politician, and you can see how that has some tendency to go the wrong way quickly. And so again, I think from a board standpoint, we're generally in favor of it, but there's things that are out there that we don't want to jump in the middle of right now. So,
And to clarify your last point, the expectation now is once you're approved for the test, then the next hurdle is passing the test. And so the culture right now is once you've passed the test, that's the quick path to licensure. Changing that might create some culture issues on the expectation for licensure. I think that's, am I capturing the point? I've got a couple other points. One was you talked about waiting to see seeing what other states do and having that kind of in the stable before Tennessee did something. There are some comedy issues. You know, if you've got a state that will not accept licensure from somebody who didn't get licensure in the 3 stages in that order, then somebody might, if we pass decoupling, license somebody, and then they go to be licensed in, what is it, Oregon, or I think that Oregon was the one that was not.
Ohio, that's
Okay.
had reservations.
It was
about
one of those.
Yeah.
But we wanted to make sure that that wasn't impeding them from getting licensed and then having to take a test again. So seeing what the states are doing, what is nationally happening. The other thing early on to when I joined the board, and I think we may have been talking about it before that, certainly, but we really got into it quite a bit more. After I joined, we looked to the professional associations and we had some open meetings and got the feedback from the professional associations, because at the end of the day, they represent the constituents who are going to have to deal with the change and at the beginning, and we might have Casey speak to this now, we got a lot of pushback from the professional associations. And the boards, correct me if I'm wrong, board, but the board's really face was that we were going to make sure that the professional associations kind of took the lead. That was where we were with it. So, Casey, I don't know if you want to speak as well.
So I've been around a little over 2 years, and this conversation was sort of just peeling the layers of the onion back. We've had some really good discussion. What I continually tell my groups, and I have a couple of them, is that you kind of have some choices here. Either you, given the structure of the state of Tennessee and the way that we feel the state is moving toward in terms of regulation, some other things, I think it's something we're going to have to look at. And our options are either you all as the licensed engineers in the state get to discuss have some input on what that needs to look like. This board, the biggest deal I think that I hear and that I really have started to preach is I would put in the hands of this current board any of it. And it's the way that you write the law that makes sure that these are some really thorough people who are here specifically to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, period, and their profession. But not, they serve at the will of the governor. They don't serve at the will of us, but they represent the engineers. And I think people are starting to be more comfortable, but it's the kind of thing that it's such a dramatic change. Like, you're an attorney, I would imagine. If somebody just said, we're going to change the way you become an attorney, like that would, it's sort of this crisis that hits. With people who know nothing about it, I tend to explain it like, if you've got a royal flush in your poker hand and you drop it on the floor, you still have all the cards that make a royal flush. But the rules are such that it doesn't matter what order the cards are in. Well, right now it matters. It matters. We're not trying to change any of the pieces of it, but there are some inherent issues with pieces and progress. And we dove into a licensure bill this year, and put an amendment on it because it does matter. And when you're looking at, we've got places in our state that are sitting on fault lines, and if you don't have the right people designing the school building sitting on that fault line, you're going to be in trouble. We're going to have children dead, buried under, there are some massive health, safety, and welfare issues that this group has been entirely thorough in thinking through. But you also have to understand the public, and by public I mean the current licensed engineers' perspective on they want to make sure that that's what they were taught to do. The canons of being an engineer include that protection and making sure that the right people are able to continue to do that. And I think what everybody is afraid of is weakening that process. I have been looking at this enough and have talked to enough groups about this to, like, my personal belief, which is certainly not the board's perspective, it's just my personal belief, and I'm not necessarily either of my groups, is that there's a way to do this that makes it work for everybody, that still protects the health, safety, and welfare. But the devil is in the details, because what you don't want is loopholes in there where we end up with engineers who really shouldn't. You don't want somebody like me who, technically could probably find somewhere to give me some kind of degree in something, and I should never be designing a building or a water treatment facility, and what we've learned over time is we've had major crises in this country and in the world in the last couple of years that are absolutely come down the engine. You look at Flint, Michigan, you look at the oil spills, you look at all of these catastrophes that we want to make sure that we're protecting Tennessee. And so the structure of the current board, I don't know that anybody would be uncomfortable putting the monitoring of that in their hands. But when we talked about a year or so ago, your predecessor came in, I don't think it was you, I think it was him, who came in with an idea about shifting some of the burden of reading applications and such to another entity. Well, anytime you do a little bit of that, I think everybody's just looking at the bigger picture. That was a really long way to say people are getting there.
Sure. And that was helpful. Thank you to all of you. Oh, and I'm sorry, Casey?
Yes, I'll
right,
give you my
Carter,
card.
yeah.
We should probably catch up.
I did have, from the association standpoint, a question when you mentioned the education, and you said, for example, that you shouldn't be a licensed engineer. And I don't mean to speak to your engineering prowess at all.
None.
But okay. But how about do you have a concern on the testing component, that the testing would not be adequate in order to make sure that we can have the education component to make sure that we're still looking at the right institutions, because you mentioned maybe you could find some place to just give you a degree, but then also any concern about the test itself being sufficient?
So I've never taken the test. I'm not, I didn't go to any school or not for engineering, but I will share with you that there is some concern in general across, and tell me if I'm speaking out of line here, because you all know as more than I do about this. But what I hear a lot from people is what we test. Like, I don't think that anyone who really is passionate about this stuff thinks that it ought to be education and a test. I think that progressive experience is the critical piece of this. Is were you sitting? What I've heard this group do in this littler group is, if a guy's sitting there pushing paper for 4 years, that's not progressive engineering experience, and that and it shouldn't be counted as such. And I think there are exceptions to every rule, and we had one this year that was the cause for a legislative fix. And that was a situation that I said on the record in testimony, you know, for this guy, like, we have the benefit of knowing that he's probably a pretty good engineer. Like, but it's not a global, you can't, there has to be some subjective merit to the people who are evaluating that experience, because it certainly shouldn't be me or shouldn't be anybody like me who doesn't really know what it takes to build a water treatment facility.
It does.
So the
Just
test, people have an
process-wise
issue with the
that-
test because people, and I've never really written down what they've said, so I'm not sure that I'm saying this correctly, but there's some people who think it's a little too academic. There's some people who think that, like, let's be honest, like, in this day and age, people either test well or they don't. Like, there are kids who are straight A students who get a 22 on their ACT, and there are C and D students who can knock out a 34 because they're really good at bubbles. Like, it just is. There's some concern on some level about, it's not concern, that's the wrong word, but there's a little bit of unknown because the test is about to change, right? Like, when it goes to the computerized test, that's a pretty big change. I run I certainly don't teach, but I facilitate a PE exam review class every semester. And this last semester we had 100% pass rate. But I've gotten to know those students as they come through, and there's some who have taken the test a number of times who have, but it's that piece that's missing. So there are others who can pass the test without a problem who don't have the experience piece. So it's all three. It's a three-legged stool. We're going Philip Lim on this since he's not here. There's a three-legged stool of education, experience, and examination. All three of those legs are really important. And what I said when we made the little tweak in the legislation this year was, if you're going to shorten one of the legs, you better make that whole bench a little stronger somehow. And it's all three of those are I don't know about the word equally important. I don't know that because I'm not one, and I'm not particularly passionate about that word equal on that, but they're all important. That much I have learned. And we have also discussed the fact that it might make some sense at some point for, sometimes it's different when there are administration changes versus a profession bringing forth legislation, and whether we do that collaboratively or not.
I think would be
We'll
important.
connect.
Thanks.
And I think what Casey said in the last was something that's very important to us. Because as a board, what we've discussed is that the way we review applications would necessarily change with decoupling. The way that, in the kind of analogy that Casey used of making the stool as strong as it needs to be, that the way we approach this would necessarily change. Just as it's going to, the whole process is going to change when it goes computerized. There's just a lot of, when change happens, you have to culturally and structurally adapt. So that's one of the other pieces that we're.
Another follow-up. So I know you mentioned Nevada, Texas, and then some states in our area have moved to decouple already, or have either done so or are in the process of doing it. Is there not necessarily a fixed number, but a critical mass at which you would say that enough of the kinks have been worked out where you maybe, so you said right now there could be some comedy issues with Tennessee moving to decoupling, but in the future, at a time when if we haven't decoupled, that at that point there would be comedy issues.
Right, it might be a detriment to our
Sure.
practitioners. Yes,
So
absolutely.
is there a range?
Robert may have an opinion. Kathy, Stephen. I wouldn't say that that's the factor that's most important to us. I don't think the external is. That's one of the pieces, but I don't think that's one of the benchmarks that once you hit it, then we.
No, I don't think it has anything to
Yeah.
do with the number. I think
Yeah.
it's more about learning from the process of the people's debates and seeing what other issues and traps they fall into so that we can avoid similar difficulties. It's not really a 40% or 60% or 26 states. That's not really it. I also just want to throw in my one observation I've had, and others didn't say this, but in reviewing applications and then sitting here with candidates who come before us and they want to present their version of why they should be allowed to sit for the exam, which is in contrast with our finding that they're not ready to sit for the exam. One of my concerns is that if they've already taken the test, that just becomes one more bullet in their gun and their ammunition where they say, well, I'm obviously qualified. Y'all are just being hard to get along with. And that's where we end up with most recent legislative session of, I'm obviously qualified. Well, in this case, yes, he was. but it's not always that cut and dry. And I think that's been what, as I've learned how to review these applications, and I look at the ones that are a little more difficult and the ones who have open consent orders and, owe their back taxes and got disciplined, and what's the difference between a $500 fine and a $4,500 fine, and measuring all that up, and in all candidates who submit, they want to get registered. There's a reason. They're not doing it for fun and they're not wasting their money. They want a license in Tennessee. So they don't submit it and we say no and they go, oh, okay, fine. They go, well, why not? So if they've already passed the test, I think that's just another piece that they're going to try to use against our established process. And that's just something that I've seen as I've gone through the learning curve, so whatever it's worth.
And I want to second that, and that was kind of my last comment that I made in my little whatever it was, but because when we have the test, there's a yes or no answer at the end of that, right? You passed it or you didn't. When we're the last line of defense, which we don't mind being the last line of defense if we truly get to be the last line of defense, then, but what happens when that person says, and I'm just going to use this recent legislation that was passed about, and this is not personal towards you or anybody that may be making this decision, but what's your barrier to trade? Is it me not giving that person their license because they look eminently qualified for that? And now that decision has now been put in one person's hand because of the stupid North Carolina dentist, whatever thing they were doing, then somebody then has a grievance to come to one person and convince one person that, oh, by the way, this board's just been unfair to me. They're not doing things right. They're keeping me from practicing engineering. And look, I'm eminently qualified. And so that's really a dangerous path to go down when you have one person that potentially could make that decision to put a registrant free out in the open to go practice engineering. I mean, and I'll go back to the law. If one person, you didn't have to take the bar, it was just one person going, yeah, you're pretty good, and you're going to go represent somebody in a death row case. I mean, there's a little different, and I don't want to be too dramatic. I'm not trying to be that, but trying to find some things that are similar. So we have a situation, in my opinion, that licensure continues to be under attack because it is difficult to get. And we want it to be on some level very difficult to get, because if it's easy to get, if it's very simple for anybody that feels like it to get it, then it's also very easy for somebody to screw something up. And, we've had too many examples of that. We've got examples where really good engineers have messed things up. So, I mean, that's not trying to take us out of the loop. It's just the odds increase pretty dramatically when you have somebody that doesn't understand calculus trying to derive an equation. And, it's just, if I were to go try to represent somebody in a court of law, my odds of getting beat are pretty high, right? I mean, unless I had indisputable video evidence of something. But so we believe that the profession, that's one more possibility that opens it up for somebody that's not qualified to practice. You ask about the test. That's a huge debate, and I don't know that we're going to solve it. Steve and I've had this discussion before. Everybody wants to go back to the old test, the old test, the old test. And the old test was not a magic bullet either, okay? What the old test did, though, that the new test does not do, is it forced you to answer a series of questions to come up with an answer. And any one of those answers, if you messed up, you didn't come out with the right answer at the end. That's kind of what we do, right? We start out with a little piece here, a little piece here, a little piece here, and we put all that together, and at the end we come up with the answer. Well, today's test is it's a discrete question test. Question 1 does not depend on question 2, does not depend on question 3. So if you're a good guesser and you've got really good test taking skills, your odds of you're not a good engineer, you're just a good test taker. And so that's our concern more with the test than anything is, and that's what when we call it academic, that's kind of what we mean, because in a class, if you're taking a test, you're getting questioned on the material, not how well you apply the material necessarily. So we've got a lot of concerns. To me, you're right. There's no limit on say, okay, if 26 states do it, if this data does this, if this is that. We've got to come to some comfort level, and I'll just give you some other insight on what we've just discussed. I mean, we've discussed actually, once you pass the test, once we think you're ready, we'll have interviews with you to determine, everybody in every grand division goes in, because that's how you used to be when you got licensed. Before they ratified your test results, you went and sat in front of a board and you spent a day or 2 days or whatever, how long it took you to get there. And they sit there in front of you with all your material stretched out and go, explain to me how you came up with the modulus elasticity for this beam and what you, and it was pretty brutal. Some of them were pretty brutal. Now some weren't, but some were pretty brutal. Because our deal is an engineer, you can tell an engineer sometimes how they talk and how they answer questions and the depth they go into or what they hand. And we've seen that when we interview people that we're concerned with their experience on. So it's not a cut and dry thing for us, and I'm tickled that you're here because there's probably a lot of grievances coming from my mouth that probably don't need to sometimes, but we are really concerned that this thing gets weakened and it gets turned over to a people that are not as familiar with the nuts and bolts of it at some point, and that's our big concern.
To return to that analogy of the three-legged stool that was used earlier, and because some other states have done this, and I guess I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that the other states have solved their problems. Which first, tell me, is that a correct assumption that the other states have been able
that
to
they've been
implement?
doing it as long enough to know what, for us
Okay.
to know. I mean, some have. Nevada's been doing it for a long time.
But I mean, Kentucky, for instance, is a year or
Right.
two.
And some of the states, it was not very difficult to do. It did not I mean, is that true? It didn't require it.
So then Nevada, since you said Nevada's been doing it for a while and they have worked through their issues, so presumably they were able to sufficiently strengthen the other legs of the stool so that the profession remains strong. Would taking Nevada as an example be something that the board would be comfortable with? Is there a different state that the board would be comfortable with? I'm just trying to think up some action steps, some plans going forward where we could take some meaningful looks and come up with some ideas.
Are you trying to come up plans because it's the hope that the commission will move in this direction?
I'm just asking questions. I'm not coming with an agenda. I will say that the legislative season will be upon us faster than we realize, and those legislative proposals. That's why I'm trying to get an idea where the board is, certainly where the professions are, in order to figure out what might happen and what should happen.
What we don't want to happen is that we support a change that our profession lobbies against us. So that's really where we are. I agree with everything that other board members have said, but let me throw out one reason why I like decoupling. I'm a civil engineer, and civil engineering is a pretty broad field, and I've had young engineers that have worked for me that have stayed in one narrow band of civil engineering, and for whatever reason put off taking the test. And there's so little of their discipline on the test, it's difficult for them to pass it. So in that situation, it's better for them to take the exam sooner rather than later, because they have the school close to the time they take the test. So for that reason, I like it. But but there are a lot of other issues, and probably the biggest issue is, in my opinion, we don't want to have our profession go into the legislators lobbying against something that we support. So if the administration or the wants to push this forward, I think that's an important step to make sure that our licensees are behind it.
Casey, you had something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, one of
The reasons that I've had all of these meetings about this is in part because I didn't want to get to a day where the administration was ready to make something happen. I think that I am a big believer in if changes are necessary, then we ought to be proactive about doing them. And like I certainly have never been opposed to, you know, if this is something that people are on board with, happy for it to come from the profession, you know, versus the administration, one way or the other. I do think that there is probably some middle ground on that, but I would really prefer to not lobby against, you know, I mean, against the, yeah. I just think that that doesn't help anyone, and then what we end up with is worse than it started, you know, and perhaps if we sit down and put together some thoughts and proposals, if you're getting pressure to move the needle, then it might be time for us to move along.
And so the question I would have is, from anybody's perspective, what's the benefit? I don't, you know, I mean, does it get people registered faster? Well, the data says no. The data says it's still 3 to 5 years, so it's really not getting them registered faster. Does it put more people on the path to licensure? Maybe, because, you know, if they've done that. But I'm not sure what the net benefit is administratively.
Can we hear from you?
That's what I reckon.
What's the net? I mean, that would be helpful to us. Can we hear from you what the benefit is?
Yeah, so I think that maybe
Quantitatively.
by asking questions, I've implied that I have an agenda. I really meant what I said when I started by saying I'm here to ask questions and find out about the decoupling process, what considerations y'all have had regarding it, and what holdups there might be in moving forward with it. So I understood from talking with Robert that it's something that other professions and other states have undertaken, and asked, why haven't we done it here? I'm not meaning to imply that this is something where I'm having administration breathe down my neck in talking with y'all that this is something that has to happen. I'm really here on a fact-finding mission as far as hearing straight from you.
I think what we've been able to do is present our concerns. We really do think that at some point this is probably something that's going to happen. We just want to make sure that it happens in the best interest of the profession.
That would certainly be my hope as well, to make sure that this happens in a right.
Madam Chair, I brought some information for NCAAS if you'd like to see it, and I'll pass it out. And it's on page 6, and it goes to show a bar graph of years of experience.
Is that
It is. So
Robert's talking about?
Can I pass these out? And, okay, page 6. I'm gonna pass it down. Well, you know, I just kind of put together some stuff I thought we could talk about.
Okay, page 6.
Right, it is. And you certainly can see from that graph how the experience helps the pass percentage rate. You know, that 5 years seems like to be the real target point to go for, because, you know, one of the, and I said on the surveying examination writing committee, and I know when we're writing exams for surveyors, I mean, it's all about what's been practiced out in the field and what's going on and what they need to know to be a licensed professional. So, and I'm sure the engineers do the same. What happens in taking that test in year 2 and 3, man? You set yourself up for failure for sure. And then it's really strange, and never look what happens in years 8, 9, and 10. The experience really didn't help it. Yeah,
Need to be
exactly.
taking it, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what Robert was speaking to. That's where the.
Anyway, I didn't aim
Thank
to
you.
bother
No,
the
thank
meeting,
you.
but I thought maybe I'd share that with you.
Do you have a different test for 11 and up?
I'm not sure what that is.
Well, they can probably put those numbers together, but
So from kind of for me rounding up, and don't want to jump in here too, but there's two things when you look at any decision. We think it does allow people to get on be licensed easier for some of the mentioned on the path for some of the reasons that Steve said. Okay, you're just out of school a little quicker. Maybe you can take that. But I think you're still 2-3 years down the road before you're ready. It's not instantaneous like some people seem to think. And you still have to have the 4 years experience. We don't want to take that piece out. So ultimately, the time it takes you to get licensed is going to be the exact amount of time that it is today. It's not going to make that window. That's nothing that we've ever discussed, shrinking that window. But the other issue is, and it's an issue kind of going back to to a trade issue almost, is are we putting the registrants that pay taxes in the state of Tennessee, that do work in the state of Tennessee, at a disadvantage economically because they can't get licensed in other states if they go do that? And I think when you look at the advantage, maybe we get more, but the disadvantage right now, over half the states don't allow it. So there may be some comity issue to keep them from doing work in other states. But yet other engineers can come into the state of Tennessee and do work. So, I mean, to me, that's not really a fair, if that's the right word. It's not an equitable way to look at things. And so when you ask the question about Nevada's kind of been an isolated case for so long that the process is probably okay, although I think there's some stuff we need to discuss. But I think our tripping point at some point gets to be when enough of our registrants, it impacts enough of our registrants because other states around us, other states they do business with, and I think we'll hear from the professions at that time that says, hey, by the way, every other state I do business in is doing early testing, so let us see if we can do it. And right now it's not impacting our registrants at all because they've got the ability to go to Kentucky and take the test. So, I mean, and you can say, well, it's a motel, it's this, but really, I mean, it's, $200 or $300 extra that they can go straight to Kentucky right now and take the test. Once they get the 4 years experience, we bring them, and they get registered in Kentucky, we bring them into the fold. I mean, that's,
what's Kentucky's experience requirements?
It's 4 years experience. It's the same thing. They just have decoupled.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay.
So, and we, by our statute, have to grant comedy to them. I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
Just a quick comment to make. Just a reminder that from when Deputy Commissioner McCormack came and talked to y'all about a year ago about the same issue, this is also connected to a desire to move away from approving applicants to sit for exams. As you'll recall, we're moving away from that procedure for architects and landscape architects. We've never done it that way for interior designers. So among other professions, there's a general trend moving away from that model of of applicants getting their education, of completing their experience, then the board reviewing them and approving them to sit for the test, and then after they pass, becoming registered. Most other professions now are not reviewing applicants' records until they've already met the requirements. They've already got their degree, their experience, they've passed the exam, and at that time, they're reviewed by the board for registration purposes. So,
Has there been any, to Robert's question and point, has there been any flack for that? Registrants that say, I am eminently qualified and I'm going to take this to a higher level because your board is not
that I'm aware
registering
of.
you?
I think
'Cause
the
that-
architects have been doing it for about 10 years, I think, or so. They've allowed early testing, and to my knowledge, I've not heard from my colleagues in other states that there's been any pushback from applicants who've passed the exam, but they're not acceptable to the board, maybe because their experience isn't acceptable. But there's a difference there in that architects have to complete an architectural experience program, used to be called the intern development program, which is very, very structured. So engineering, of course, we don't have a similar program. It's a little more subjective in that sense. So
as you can see, there are a lot of issues to this, which is why we've been discussing it for a long time. But I think that one of the most important things would be for the associations. Board's eyes, I think that's a big part of this. That's personally, that would be a big part of that.
Well, I appreciate all of you giving your honest opinions and answering my questions.
We're not short on those.
I know I took up probably more time than you envisioned this
important.
would take, but I appreciate it. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you for being here.
Good meeting all of you. If I haven't provided contact information, I'll do that after we wrap up here.
And one of the final things, and this is going to be a plug for NCWS, the zone meeting. One of the ways that we learn what the experiences are in our southern zone, those states around us where our practitioners tend to do a lot of business, is at these zone meetings. So that's a big source of information for us. Is being, and we as a board are very conscious of our responsibility of being plugged into that. So not just the annual, but the annual meeting, but the southern zone. So thank you. All right, I think the next thing we have is applications and audits for review. This morning assigned, I don't know if anybody saw the email, wanted to send out the email with the, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. That's a different one. Oh, thank you. Wanted to send out the applications yesterday, and I managed to open and look at them this morning. Where's Kathy? Okay. Robert, did you get the thing about reviewing deal? I knew you had. Could you also look at Fitzgerald since you've already done that? Thank you, sir, since Ricky is not here. Kathy's doing Bretson. Stephen, you're doing Frederick. Okay, and I have done Opry. We're going to take a few moments to make sure everybody is up to speed. Stephen, have you done yours? Okay, you're ready. I'll make sure Kathy's ready. I'll give Robert a moment to look at Fitzgerald. What if we take a 5-minute break, except for Robert? Don Deal. That's a great name. Donald Deal. Hard to say, by comedy. From Mr. Campbell.
All right, so my only real concern with him was he had a situation where he didn't pay his state income tax. Now, it's a long story, but anyway, the story is he came up with a payment plan with Missouri, and he still owes about $60, I think, or I think his last payment will be in June, which normally, whatever, right? But the problem we have in the state of Tennessee is we have people with their license, to me, with their license getting suspended or not renewed and different things for not paying child support, for not paying back tax stuff. I mean, any kind of judgment that the state may have against these people. So my concern was not that he's not qualified. He's qualified, and obviously some sort of mistake was made in him not paying his income tax, and he's getting current with that. But why would we treat him differently than we would treat somebody in the state of Tennessee that's in a similar deal when we would keep them from getting their license because they had not paid child support, back taxes, that kind of stuff. And I know it's only $60, and I know he's getting close to the end of that, but then if it's that big of a deal, finish paying the stupid thing and come on and get current and be done with it. I mean, that's kind of, I just think it's consistent for us to not license him until he has his obligations out of the way.
But to be clear, we don't do that for somebody who is not paying taxes to the state of Tennessee.
But there's a judgment against him from Missouri, which judge for child support and other things are still a judgment.
For the state of Missouri.
Yes, that's correct.
So essentially, I mean, I'm just
no, I mean,
begging the question here that it begs the question that are we doing this on behalf of the state of Tennessee? Because he doesn't owe any taxes in Tennessee.
No, but he still has a similar judgment
No, I
that we would do
understand
that. So
I understand that, but he doesn't. I mean, the reason that we would take somebody's license in Tennessee is because is on behalf of the state of Tennessee.
Right,
Maybe
that's
I'm.
right.
I mean, I'm guessing
that's a good
that. Is
point.
that why it's
That's a good
set
point.
up that way? But so Missouri's already done that. We're not really in a position because he doesn't owe anything in Tennessee. So that's my only counter to that argument.
I would say that until he is no longer suspended in his home state, he's not eligible in Tennessee.
Is that true?
I'm suggesting that as.
I mean, what's our precedent for that? Our precedents for that.
That, and
Thank
because I agree with you in that typically when we would revoke a license under a judgment in Tennessee, it's a specific statute that we're not going to give someone a privilege under the law when they owe the state money. So it is a little distinguishable, but I'll look into our authority here.
So, and then Kathy had the question of, Sarah, Kathy had the question of, can we, or should we, because he's suspended in another state?
Is he even eligible simply on the basis of the
what's the
fact that he's
precedent? Yeah,
currently
exactly.
suspended somewhere else?
While you're looking that up, would it make sense for us to move to the next one? Or you're ready? Okay, never mind.
She's fast.
She is. I'm
I
impressed.
got John here as my second in command, and he's very familiar. As you know from the section 62.2308, it's broad discretion as far as what you may do as far as accepting an application. However, it does give us a list of what they can be found guilty for, and breach of contract and things like that are mentioned, or violations of a rule adopted by the board. But an additional one is F, which says that of having a person's right to practice suspended or revoked in another state. So you actually have express authority here to deny based on an out-of-state suspension. So, despite
That might
where
be
that comes
the
from.
most appropriate way to come at this.
Yes.
Okay. It makes sense. Sounds like we agree on that. So really, the wording is until the suspension has been or he's back in good standing in Missouri. Okay. Second one, have you had a chance, Kathy? You want us to come back
I'm
to
flipping
it?
through it. I think the issue is pretty straightforward. If I understand correctly, the issue is that he was previously allowed to get his license in Tennessee. However, he let his license in Tennessee lapse. Is that correct? I'm reading that right? We're talking about his Tennessee license is what his lapse. And he no longer meets the board's educational requirement because his undergrad degree is in finance, even though he has a graduate engineering degree. So we haven't even reviewed his application this time around because he doesn't meet the minimum requirements relative to education. So that's the issue. Does somebody want to weigh in or have an opinion? I don't want to monopolize. No longer meets the minimum ABET undergraduate educational requirement for licensure in Tennessee. Yes, correct.
No, he's not been told that.
Oh, well, okay.
It's not been reviewed.
There's another statute that weighs in on this issue. It's 62.2307. Someone who's reapplying for registration after their license is lapsed. And it's, if you want to pull it up or not, but 62.2307 paragraph E says that any person wishing to renew a certificate later than 6 months after its expiration date shall reapply for certification, so that's the position this applicant is in. The board may, in its discretion, waive any further examination of such an applicant and any further education and experience beyond that obtained at the time of such applicant's original registration in Tennessee. So at your discretion, you can waive any any
Even though he doesn't
changes
meet
to the education requirements.
Even though he doesn't meet the requirements, we could still let him.
Right, because he met the requirements when he was first registered, right? You could just.
Strikes me that this would be worthy of some investigation or some.
Wanda, do you remember how many years his license lapsed? How long was he out of Tennessee licensure? No.
Here I think it says that expiration was 2010.
Between 2010 and 2017.
So 7 years that he was out of Tennessee as not registered with us.
Obviously, he's not a Tennessee resident.
Looks like he was in. No.
Or Florida?
Yeah, Florida.
And I'll just weigh in. To my knowledge, I don't know of a case where the board has denied a reapplication on the basis of them not meeting the current requirements of the law or required reexamination for someone reapplying. I'm not aware of, that's not to say that's never happened, but I'm not aware of that occurring anytime recently.
In the interim, he also in 2015 gained licensure in Kansas. So he hasn't, it's not like he's just been sitting on the bench or anything. If there's no, I like to go to precedents and look back at what we've always done, and in order to be consistent, unless there's a substantial difference between this and in the past, I would suggest that we go ahead and allow him to renew his, or how would you say that? See, approve his reapplication, not renewal.
Not been disciplined in another.
Doesn't appear to have been disciplined. Doesn't appear to have anything outstanding against him. He's kept all his PDHs up, from what I can tell. It looks, for the licenses that he has, not in Tennessee, of course. He did miss out on the great privilege of paying $2,800 in taxes to the great state of Tennessee. In case we want to bring that up to him.
Yeah, just as a perk, right?
Yes. It's an added benefit, of course.
Good point. Anybody object to that? All right. Does that seem reasonable?
I want to do a motion on that.
Make a motion that we approve his reapplication for licensure in Tennessee.
Okay.
Without further comment.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Remind me, I've been traveling a lot. Do we have to do a motion on every one of these? We didn't do one of them.
That's what we've been doing. And you may want to, I don't think you made a motion on Mr. Deal.
We did not.
Yeah.
We did not. I was going very informal today.
So motion
Picked off
on-
my shoes and everything.
I make a motion on Mr. Deal that we deny his application due to the license being suspended in Missouri. And once that suspension is lifted, can we go that far and say once the suspension is lifted, then we can consider his license again?
Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. All right. Robert, do you have a recommendation on Mr. Fitzgerald?
I do, and this one's kind of so he's 3 hours deficient in math and basic sciences, and I always have kind of one of these things when somebody goes to one of our service academies that I reckon I've got a feeling that they get some sort of a little higher rigor than the rest of us do. And this guy went, I think it's a guy, it went to the, Michael, went to the Maritime U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And then he had a little 30-hour class. Let me see if I can get the right name of this just to make sure that it sounds. Let me find this little class. It's a 30-hour class on operating nuclear submarines or something. Let's see, what is that? Oh, Nuclear Power School. That really seems to me like it ought to take care of a basic math and science thing. I mean, sounds like to me, but again, I didn't know an E field
That was
from a
in
B
addition
field.
to his,
Yes, I didn't know an E
transcript.
field from a B field, so it really didn't make any difference
what's
on
your
that.
recommendation?
I recommend we approve him. I would assume that he would have 3 hours of basic math and science in a nuclear power school. That was 30 hours. 30 hours.
Is that your recommendation? Does anybody have any objection to approving Mr. Fitzgerald?
If we approve him, we would also be approving this applicant without the benefit of PE supervision and experience, I think. So
Where does that, is that true?
Say it again. Without having PE experience? Oh, because he all has COs that aren't PEs in the Navy. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be,
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah, I'm looking at it. He's got COs from Vicksburg. Basically, Merchant Marine Academy is not the same as like Naval Academy and stuff. So he was at Mayport.
Robert, he was at
Rhode
Mayfield.
Island, isn't it?
No, this one's.
The Merchant Marine's not in Rhode Island?
Oh, I'm sorry. The Academy.
Isn't that where the Coast Guard is?
Yes,
So
correct.
Mr. Campbell's recommendation is based on that course that he took in addition to
His degree.
his degree being appropriate for the 3 hours. So that you feel is appropriate. Now, the other issue is whether his experience was gained, looking at his experience, and whether that experience was gained.
Yeah, if you go to his application, if you guys open up the Fitzgerald app, page 19 lists his references with state of registration, and out of the 5, he has 1 who is a PE out of North Carolina. Doesn't have any, and
What was
none
the
of them are
relationship?
present or past supervisor.
But
Well,
that's
in his work experience, it doesn't even list names. It just lists commanding officers.
Commanding officers, that's right.
So how could you check it?
Is there a motion on the table?
there is not.
Okay.
I'm trying to think, do we need more information?
Formal review on this?
Probably, at this point, I don't think there's enough to deny, but I would think that we might want to look at this. I'm with Robert that the nuclear course.
I think we've been rather flexible on this. I just brought it up because I wanted us to, the one I'm getting ready to talk about is a similar situation.
Oh, really?
With,
Well, and also if you look at his references too, Laura, out of his, so on his supervisor references, only 1 he lists as a PE. And then if you go through them, they all talk about, I'm a Naval Systems Command, blah, blah. I mean, it clearly these are not PEs that he's working. He doesn't have hardly any PEs that are standing up for him. So I think we might want a closer look.
don't we have a requirement that 2 have to be PE? So 3? Well,
There you go.
there you go.
Okay, so does somebody have a motion about how we want to respond to Mr. Fitzgerald?
Did I look at this one, Wanda? Is this one of the ones I looked at this morning? Do you know? Didn't get to it? Okay. I'm happy to look at it in greater depth, but it won't be before tomorrow.
So if Kathy, if you can go ahead and take a look at it and maybe even help Wanda get more information if it's needed.
We'll ask him for some more information.
You're not going to make a motion on that. This is going to be tabled. Okay. Mr. Frederick, which is Steve. Mr. Lim, who is in absentia, stated that we may want to interview.
I didn't really have any issues with the applicant's design experience. The thing that I noticed was his lack of PE supervision in his work experience.
Does he have references?
He has 2 PEs, so I guess he's supposed to have 3. But they were early on in his career. In his last 7 years of experience, he works in I think something to do with the military, or a military support consultant.
I'm sorry, how much experience does he have?
Oh, probably 8 years. So he has plenty of experience. Early on in the career, he worked for Bechtel for a few months and Sizemore Frederick Inc. for a few months, and I think he worked under PEs probably, well, not even a year total. Then he worked for another company from 2010 to the present, and
That was not under the supervision?
not under supervision.
Okay.
So the vast majority of his work experience was not under supervision of a PE.
Well, you approved this. Is there any reason that you would want to continue to approve it, or?
I mean, he had 2. He's got kind of one of those non-standard careers, and when I look at his experience, I mean, it's pretty dang impressive. I mean,
That's what surprised me.
I
Philip
mean,
noted a problem with his understanding of design. I didn't have an issue with that. It's just this PE supervision. But I know some employers, that's very difficult, like Corps of Engineers, TVA.
I think I reviewed this morning. I think I did. I think this like next to the last one I saw. And I thought I agreed that it should be approved. Wanda, you don't have that paperwork on you? Okay. I'm pretty sure that I agreed with Robert because, number one, the length of experience that he had, and if you actually read his project descriptions, mechanical designer for blah, 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 lead mechanical designer for solid collection filter system, mechanical designer for water filtration system at Holston Army Ammunition Plant. I mean, he's been doing engineering, and I think he's just at the mercy of the fact that his employer doesn't necessarily support registration. So I always see these cases kind of as an opportunity for us to give him, get him in there, and then his employer suddenly might be encouraging of licensure. But I think as many years as he has of experience in working for people who are in the engineering, but these are engineering companies.
So unlike Mr. Fitzgerald, who didn't really display
He was
that.
in the Navy.
Okay.
He was in the Marine.
You feel like this
guy is
person
in the
explained-
engineering business, correct?
Then there's one other issue. Then he only has 2 PEs in his.
That doesn't match actually. If you look at it, the table says there's only 2, but the actual references there's 3. Yeah, if you look at he just didn't fill it out right. He didn't. Yeah. Because I went and checked that too.
So he's covered.
Okay.
The table itself is incorrect, but the references there's 3 PEs. Yeah.
I'm looking at the summary.
We're going easy button. So in this case, we feel like it's appropriate. Does somebody want to make a motion, please?
I'd make a motion to approve. That's Mr.
second.
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Okay. We're now on to
I make a motion, we deny Mr. Opry.
I have a question before we close. So he's trying to quote chapter and verse on this, and I just want to know where he's wrong. So if you, again, go to his page 5 of his application, and he says, my degree was accredited by the EAC of the ABET, which complies with the state of Tennessee rules and supersedes Tennessee Code annotated rule, blah, 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 blah. So who's right and who's wrong? I just want to know. TAC. Okay. So he was
I
wrong.
asked the same question.
He
was wrong.
He's
with
wrong.
the EAC.
He calls it EAC,
Right.
and he's misleading us.
One that says that happens a lot.
If you look at his NCAAS record, the first page of that, which is on page 7 on the iPads, yeah, it makes it clear that he has a bachelor's in electrical engineering technology, and it's ETAC accredited, not EAC. So he apparently he
Left
doesn't
that
know
part
the
out.
difference between EAC
And I
and
didn't either,
ETAC.
so that's
Yeah.
doesn't like your answer. No, we got you. Okay, call the question.
Sir, can I just, go ahead, I'm sorry, we haven't voted on that one yet, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was gonna
Did
go
we
to
make a
another.
motion?
Robert did.
I did, made a motion to deny.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? All right, I think that wraps up all of the applications.
So, quick question, Fitzgerald, who we just said we need more information, he's actually got 3 PE references.
And I was looking at the
I
summary
was too.
table, not,
I was too.
I don't think any of the PE references are actually ever supervised him. They're peers, co-workers.
Saying, but we've let peers and coworkers, if
we
they've
have.
been integral involved in their design process and can vouch for them on
The
that.
motion was to look into it.
I understand, but I didn't want that to have to be,
There was.
he didn't have 3 PEs to go back to him, because he seems to have 3 PEs, basically.
Want me to set this up for you? Because it's a charge from the Continuing Education Committee. Yes. Under action items, which is on page 80 on your iPads, if you want to look at it, but you don't have. You were tasked with discussing a proposal to require all continuing education hours to address health, safety, and welfare subjects. Currently, the rules only require that a majority of hours address HSW and technical competency. So their proposal is that all hours address those issues, and also to include HSW definitions in the rules for all professions. Because currently we have it for architects and interior designers in the alternative option rule, but not for the other professions, although we do have policies defining HSW subjects, which are included on your iPads. The rules start on page 4, and then behind that are the policies that have been adopted in the past. But, of course, policies are not rules, so they're not binding. They're simply provided as guidance for registrants.
So the two things.
Right.
That's a big change.
Architects are in favor of that, and their alternative option already requires that, but I think they're okay with requiring it across the board. But I think your committee and the Landscape Architect Committee are both discussing that issue, because there were some concerns about that from sessions. And interior designers are definitely not going that direction. Susan was opposed to that, so that's where we are.
The second piece of this is that we would have a definition of that passes, that we would have all of them, then, or we need a definition regardless.
It would be good to have a definition. That's definitely a frequently asked question, which is why we develop those policies, right? But it would be good to have them certainly in rules, I think, since that term is used.
I think this seems like a big discussion. All aware of this? Or is this, okay, I guess did I miss it
Served on
last?
the Continuing Education Committee.
Yeah, you
I'm
served on
I'm
the
not sure who
Continuing
in
I
here.
didn't
I
know,
don't think
maybe y'all
anybody in
discussed it
here
last
serves
time
on
I
that
was
committee,
gone.
do they? Yeah.
The report last time, I think.
Robert, since you're on the committee, would you mind?
No, I'm not on the committee. I just was,
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
read through the
I think Ricky
information.
Versailles is on the committee.
Yeah, I read through the
actually. Yeah.
information and saw where we've had this before. So I'm good on some level with looking at this. I would be interested to know. I mean, the real beneficiary of this are people that are registered in multiple states, because it allows them not to have to go, is it June, is it August, is it this? And Ricky has made that comment before. So I mean, in general, I think I'm in favor of this. And I think people that are registered in I just don't know how many of our registrants are registered in multiple states. And I would imagine the majority are registered in another state, because half of our applicants are out of state registrants, right? So, I mean, by default, at least 50% would be, and I would think it's more than that. So, I think from that standpoint, it's probably a pretty good deal to get one cutoff date, one.
What are we talking about? I
No,
thought we
we're
were talking
talking about two different
HSW.
things.
Well, HSW, the part of this is the one cutoff date too.
We've already done that.
You're talking about calendar year reporting?
Did we do that last time?
We did that last time.
Yeah, I think if y'all were
Or we
supportive
made
of
it an
that.
option for last time?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is all about that all of the,
Okay, I thought we were, I'm sorry, I didn't miss that part of it.
Okay, it's coming back to me. I
And
remember.
what was approved
I remember
last time,
something.
I can go over that, was language allowing registrants to request a continuing education waiver for a specific period of time in cases of hardship, phasing out carryover hours for architects, engineers, and landscape architects, and allowing engineers and landscape architects to report hours on a calendar year basis. So I think that's what
So
you're
that's what we
referring
did
to.
last time.
So
Okay,
those
I'm
are,
sorry.
you're already said you're okay with those changes. But
This is
Yeah.
different.
this is requiring all of the hours to
I'll
be
shut up then.
HSW, Kathy.
I do remember now. I'm sorry. I did sit down in this conversation. I don't know if I'm on the committee or not. Good Lord. But in general, whoever else that was discussing it, we as the engineers representative of the Continuing Education Committee felt that we did not want all continuing education hours to be HSW because technology changes so quickly. And if you look at every discipline that's out there for engineering, that there was a sense that people needed to be able to get the training that they needed to stay on top of their profession within whatever discipline they were practicing, as opposed to always going back to the ongoing health, safety, welfare, and that they didn't want to be having to double dip, and therefore the employers be double paying for training to keep technically current, and at the same time be addressing what was felt would be fairly restrictive to health, safety, and welfare issues. Does that make sense?
Where is this coming from? I mean, do we feel like there's a continuing education problem?
I think it was more from the architectural side. Isn't that right? Because they're much more
Oh,
about
what?
life safety code, so they were much more.
Do we have to do it just because they're doing it?
oh no, we don't.
Okay,
No.
good.
That's why we're discussing.
Okay.
because, yeah, we're not mandating
I don't see any
anything.
reason for it. I mean, why? My question is the why. Why
I
would we
believe
do
it was the health safety, the life safety code issue for architects is much bigger,
Right.
and constantly changing. I guess I don't know that from my standpoint, but when they talk about building codes and codes officials, does that make sense?
when I do these continuing education audits, if it has anything to do with even the technical part, I mean, to me, that's health, safety, and welfare. So it really doesn't bother me. So I'm trying to think, well, I guess if you took a class like from TDOT on how to, like the local programs thing, Robert, maybe that's not, I don't know, but
even then, you could
yeah,
draw a line back to it.
I'm pretty liberal on my definition of HSW since we don't have one.
I was going to say, I'm not sure but is it broken? Are we having an issue with us allowing continuing education that we think is not appropriate? In the ones I review, I don't feel like that's an issue. Do any of y'all? I don't see that there's an issue here.
Duly noted. So what about definitions of HSW?
Why would we do that?
Rather than do that either. Okay.
Why would we do that? Yeah. No, we don't like definitions.
Well, and there's so many different disciplines in the engineering side
there's
as
just
opposed to architecture. I mean,
it would take us a year just to come up with
just to agree on what constituted HSW. And what doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, to your point, what isn't.
Right. I think we've got other things that we need to focus on and day jobs. Now we're to the wonderful part of the agenda, which is the report on NCAAS regional meeting, and then we get to follow that by Roy Shrewsbury, who's also already been beneficial to us. But we'll start on the NCAAS section of our agenda. And Robert, would you mind regaling us with all that you learned?
The report's on page 19.
If you need
on your
a
iPads.
memory. And I've got rum here if you'd like some.
Let's talk about what was and what was not a little bit. I'll just run down and kind of go quickly through the things that, because we're going to start talking about electronic and digital signatures a little bit more. Florida's got some information that we can talk about. I'm actually meeting with TDOT tomorrow after our meeting to kind of keep going through parts of that. Steve and I've met with Knox County this week or a couple weeks ago just to kind of see where everybody was. But anyway, that's this sealing of digital files, sealing of models, sealing of task force has kind of been started looking at that, and so that's going to be a big deal for us all down the line. Something that we'd already talked about, the graduate degree can't be used to do experience in education, so that was fine. The thing that probably generated as much, if not more, discussion was the having a combined zone meeting in 2020. Because our member board administrators evidently whined about it enough that that looked to be a big deal. But 2020 is the 100-year anniversary, or some anniversary, not 100-year. It's what anniversary is it? So it is 100-year anniversary. I was thinking it was 70, but anyway, it's the 100-year.
That's because we're all feeling old.
Anyway.
We don't want to admit it's 20.
So anyway, so they said, for this 1 year, let's look at it. I mean, there were a lot of pros and cons, travel, this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, that's what. Instead of having it, you have an annual meeting and you have a zone meeting. So your annual meeting, we're now in the annual meeting, we break out into Southern Zone has a meeting and Northeast Zone has a meeting. Now it's going to all be together. We're going to basically do that twice, okay? But it's going to have a zone, more of a zone flavor, go over motions, but you'll still break out into your individual pieces and parts. And again, the several pros and cons. I mean, if you're terribly interested, it's in 2020. I think we'll just wait till it gets a little closer to time to go over that. But that was one thing.
On behalf of the whiny MBAs,
Yes.
I would encourage you to support that motion.
I think we've been told what to do.
As an MBA who had to plan the zone meeting last year,
That's true.
I'm supportive of this change.
We trust you, John.
Financially, and again, we'll talk some more about this too, but doing well. Revenue's up 2.2. The FE exam seems to be coming back around pretty well. Investments are doing good. We do have a reduction, or an anticipated reduction, because we reduced the fees last time. And so that's about a net loss of $1 million for the next year. The exam rescheduling fees seem to be going well. Right now, the reserves are $34.5 million, which is up a couple million, I think, from last time. There's some talk about some of these exams that only have a very few people taking it, about what it takes to continue on, not continue on. Those will all be, there's still a lot of those will continue to be paper, and there's some discussion on when we do it. At the bottom of that chart is a conversion of the different exams. Chemi, I think, is on for next year, and then and nuclear is on for next year. Environmental, mechanical, electrical, and they've got structural in 2024, which I think, from everybody's estimations, pretty aggressive, pretty optimistic plan, because it may never get there. Let's see, the tracking system for your continuing education is basically up to speed. Let's see here, make sure I'm not going. There was some about the way officers are filled. It says change to amend the bylaws to require that offices of president and zone vice president filled by licensed engineers or surveyors, and see if there's a task force to see if the bylaws need to be changed to allow president-elect to be decided through a qualifications-based selection rather than rotation through the zone. So that was, now in your officer elections, Tim Lingerfelt from our surveyor board was elected as the assistant zone VP, and Chris Knotts from Louisiana was elected as the zone vice president. Our next meeting is in Miami Beach, Florida, August the 23rd through 26th. And our interim meeting is in Charlottesville in April before then. My report from the Tennessee board, we talked about our grants being increased to $350,000 and talked about the competitive project that we did. I said that we're continuing to monitor decoupling. I did talk about the legislation that was passed that allows an official within the department to overturn board decisions that constitute an unreasonable restraint of trade. There are a lot of boards that are having some sort of legislation and or blowback from the North Carolina dental decision about how they operate and how their oversight is. And so we're not the only ones, although, again, I think ours seem to be a little having power in one person's hand. We talked about how we're continuing looking at QBS, and we are in the process of replacing 2 long-serving board members with Hal Bothrop and Philip Lim. So that's because all the boards talked about that most of the boards talked about that there's this gap between, you got a lot of people that have served for a period of time, how we keep the institutional knowledge going through transitions, and several had long-serving board members that were going off. And Phillips, 12 years or more, 32 years. I mean, he's been here.
Feels like it.
He was here when Dad was here. So anyway, a lot of boards are going through that, how they keep that part of it going. So that's kind of the Reader's Digest thing.
Does anybody have any questions for Robert? Thank you for representing us.
Thank you all for going to bat. That was, well, it was seriously, it was a good meeting. Again, having a meeting with TDOT tomorrow is a direct result of this, to try to talk about electronic signatures, and it really will be something that saves them a ton of time, as well as our registrants, if we figure out how to make this work and how we can all get comfortable with it. But probably, and I'll say this, and we could have taken 10 of our boards down there for probably the amount of time that it potentially could save the state if we institute some of this stuff, because it really is a huge time saver, and that's things that you learn at these meetings that are important. I actually sat behind the guy from Florida that wrote their stuff. So I mean, he and I got to talk, and he got all the contact info. And it wouldn't happen if I wasn't down there. It would have been something else.
Well, good. Good. Anybody else have any other questions? All right. Before Rory, I go to you. Chris Gwaltney's here. I want to say hello and welcome. Thank you for always being supportive and being here at the meetings. And am I correct in you just won an award? Yeah. That's
It is a top honor.
that is a top honor. So we're pleased to have you in our presence.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Congratulations and thanks.
Allowing me to be here helps me to win that award.
That's right, exactly. Your service to the profession. Roy, welcome again.
Thank
you
you.
for being
Thank
here.
you, Madam Chair. Last year, Jerry Carter brought before the board, along with the president, Mike Honzett, and we discussed the amount of involvement of some of the boards with NCAAS, especially on serving on committees and different things. So, a plan was formulated to reach out to those boards, and not necessarily the Tennessee board, but there are boards that doesn't do anything with NCAAS. They don't volunteer for anything. They don't come to any of the meetings, and maybe not necessarily because it's their fault. It may be because of restrictions from their state or whatever. So Jerry sent out letters. John replied and said, yeah, we'd like to have someone to come to our board meeting and to talk about NCAAS, and thank you, John, for that. So that's why I'm here. The states that I'm doing before I end up in August in Miami, that'll be the end of my tour of duty with NCAAS, and I'll be so happy. I still have to, let's see, next month I'm going to Florida to meet with their PE board. In July, I'm going to Idaho to meet with their PE board, and then I'm going to meet with the West Virginia PE board in July as well, since I'm close by. So anyway, thank you for letting me attend and be here. I brought a handout with you, and some of the things that Robert talked about in his presentation actually dealt with some of the things that I have in the handout. So, and Robert's exactly right. I mean, attending, having someone attend and be at these interim zone meetings is very important, because there's a lot of issues that get brought up. Talk about motions it's going to be at the annual meeting and how those might be handled, supported, not supported, and you know, and there's some coming up this time. You know, it's like the California motion. You know, to do these more votes than just per board. You know, so give these states have multiple board or have one board, they'll have 2 votes per board. Kansas would end up with 3 votes. So, you know, that'll be there, and of course, you know, all those things get talked about in the interim meetings, and it's very important. I don't know how familiar all the board members are with NCAAS, but of course it was created back in 1920. This is on the first page, with 5-member boards. Currently, we have 50 states and 5 jurisdictions representing 70 boards. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Down in Clemson, which is their headquarters, NCAAS has a facility that they lease the property from the school there, Clemson, and they own the building, but they lease the property. So they have 74 full-time employees. Of course, there's 4 zones: north, south, central, and western zones. Southern being the biggest, and I guess Tennessee's in the southern zone. Each member board constitutes, or all the members constitutes the council, and each member board has a vote. And of course, the council, which is you all are part of the council, you know, they approve the policies and all the business of NCAAS. I mean, you are NCAAS. You know, Jerry works for the council. You know. The chain of command, of course, the board of directors is made up of the vice presidents of the 4 zones. Jerry Carr, who is CEO, he's in charge of all the staff. Of course, the board of directors, Jerry answers to them, and the board answers to the zones. Also, we have a COO who's Davey McDowell, and top-notch qualified folks that work for NCAAS in Clemson. Second page, communication. NCAAS puts out 6 times a year what they call their exchange. I'm sure everybody gets one of those, and it's always pretty good reading. Some very good articles in there about different folks throughout the professional communities. We have convention reports and, of course, the minutes of the annual meeting, and there's also minutes of the zone meetings, the interim meetings. The annual meeting's going to be coming up in August in Miami. Should be nice and warm. So, but usually the annual meeting's well attended. There's a lot of resources for NCAAS. There's the NBA. I guess John's pretty familiar with, and there's the Law Enforcement Exchange. John, do y'all use the Law Enforcement Exchange a lot? Yeah, so that's a good way to kind of keep up with who's doing what and how that's being handled. Exam development. Of course, the NCAAS has hundreds and hundreds of volunteers working on exam development, and I was asking Jerry Carter one day about the structural exam, and I mean they have like 700 people work on that exam. To grade it. I mean, so it's huge. The council record that NCAAS keeps right now, we have like 65,000 individuals with that record. Credential evaluation, we have a staff of 6 that does about 110 evaluations a month. And over on the next page, the NCAAS has 11 standing committees, and they deal with all areas of NCAAS. Sometimes the president might form a special task force to deal with a certain issue that may be going on that needs to be dealt with. So anyway, part of this is to encourage the member boards to be involved in NCAAS, to volunteer, attend meetings, and engage. There's a lot of information on the NCAAS website, and you can go and set yourself up into My NCAAS. Also, one of the things, or a couple of things I put in here, of course, was the bar graph, and you all had some questions that John had sent me. Also, on next to the last pages, Robert had mentioned about when the computer-based testing is going to come about for the different PE exams, and of course chemical nuclear is going to go right out of the chute. And the last page, before I go back to the questions that you all proposed, the last page, we just approved these award winners at our board meeting a couple weeks ago. John submitted 3 questions from your board. First one is, what is the long-range plan for NCAAS to use their reserves to promote the profession? The budget for next year has increased for discretionary spending by the board. I know that NCAAS has a large, you might call a stockpile of money or cash. They have been using this money to support different projects, like Engineers Without Borders, ASCE, Dream Big. We now have $200,000 a year we're spending on the Engineering and Surveying Awards for the different. So I don't know how to answer those reserves, and will it continue? At some point in time, I won't be around, but at some point in time, if it does continue to be profitable to the point, will they fund additional delegates to these meetings? Will they come up with some reduction? I don't know what the answer to that is, but NCAAS is ran by the council. You are a member of the council, so whatever you all decide, I mean, that's exactly how that will be handled. Um,
Can I interrupt just because I think
Yeah.
that's my question?
Sure.
Let me tell you what. Couple things. One is I think one of the reasons that Tennessee has not been as active in some of this is we had a pretty big travel restriction put on us several years ago, 10 years ago or something, and kind of somewhat coming out of that travel restriction thing. So I mean that's part of it. A part of it is some of the reserves and how things are done. And I was one that had this question, and let me try to say this in a succinct way, but the programs that we're sponsoring, Engineers Without Borders, awards, all that are really good. But we're almost preaching to the choir. These are people that are already in engineering, the people that are already involved in engineering, and giving them recognition is a positive thing. The thing that I'm not sure that NCAAS, at least in the presentation of it, understands, I think in some period of time, they're not going to have a business model to go be an NCAAS, because I mean, my thought is that licensure will not be, in 20 years, we may not have licensure. Now that sounds overly dramatic, and you think, well, Robert's just being overly dramatic. But we in the state of Tennessee have now got a situation where one person can basically say that's a barrier to trade, and boom. Indiana 2 years ago had something where they wanted to get rid of their licensure boards and let the building codes officials do things. So it's not a far slide to get to where, well, licensure's not that important. So if licensure's not that important then NCAAS has no product to go offer. So what my concern is that we're not being on any level strategic enough with the reserves that we have, looking for the real threats that are out there to engineering licensure. And again, Engineers Without Borders, awards, all those are great. What are we doing to educate, engage elected officials on the importance of licensure? What are we doing to, umbrella statement, promote licensure to those to whom licensure does not seem to be that big of a deal? It seems like we have these discussions about how much should we pay, do you get a first class ticket if it's more than four? I mean, got it, okay?
Believe me, I understand.
But
what you're
those are
saying.
little bitty things.
Yeah, I understand.
And we've got this big thing of money that it seems like we ought to be able to come together in a little more strategic way to make sure that there's going to be a licensure in 20 years. And 20 years may not be the right. I'm just using a future time. Because, for something like 4,000 years of human history, there was not a licensure. and so, it's kind of one of those things where it seems to me that can go away at some period. And I just think we need to be a little more strategic about how we're talking about this. We get so scared of an exam breach, and that's all you hear about, why we have to have so much money. And the bigger enemy, I think, is sitting out there in state capitals and special interest groups and things like that really do see licensure as a bad thing, not to protect the health, safety, and welfare. And I wish we would use it in a little bit more strategic. I've said that 4 times, so I'll shut up on strategic.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I do know in some of the discussions, and I've never really thought about this a whole lot, but NCAAS has to be very, very, very careful how they lobby, because they're not allowed to lobby because they're a nonprofit. So that's why they support a lot of the other groups, like the engineering societies and the surveying societies that actually do go out and lobby. I know that Jerry and maybe Davey was with one of the societies, engineering societies, I think, in Washington, D.C., and they were actually going to go up on Capitol Hill and I guess speak to some of the lawmakers. Well, Jerry and Davey decided that probably shouldn't be something they should be doing, because they would not want to have that reflect back against the NCAAS.
So to clarify, how does NCAAS support the professions?
Well, I know a lot of the professions. They give them money, for their organization, and they support them, and of course, the education. We just, trying to reach out to some of the other groups, like, kids between the 9th and 11th grade students. We just approved a $100,000 investment in finalizing a $2 million film promoting licensures for engineers that they're kind of finalizing, and NCAAS is actually going to be the lead in making marketed and taken to the places it needs to be taken to, and shown to the kids it needs to be shown to. So they work really hard. They're very vigilant in taking care of business and trying their best to promote engineering and surveying, but also writing the exam questions and coming up with a product that protects the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And I think that's kind of what licensure is about. If we didn't license engineers or surveyors, I mean, I'm not sure happening. I understand exactly what you're saying, because with a vote in the U.S. Congress, I mean, or your state legislature, all that could go away in one breath. But anyway, I guess that's for discussion today. But we talked about your concerns with decoupling, and I think I tried to address those for you. The exams question. The council studied the idea multiple times on oversight exam committees with EPE committee about that very thing, and they did not want to substitute technical questions for the type of NCAAS told me that has been looked at by the EPE committee, and they did not. Questions. License mobility. I think I know everybody on our board and a lot of the NCAAS folks would like to see a lot more mobility, where comedy and the continuing education, because it is those hours that you paid for in your state and not be able to transfer them to another state you might be. Anyway, see, is there anything else I put together for you? I don't think there is, but I'm willing to answer any questions you might have. NCAAS is this. I'll be finished in August. Paul Terrell will be taking my place in the Northeast Zone, and a lot of hours away from my business to help promote the profession of engineering surveying.
Question with regard to the lobbying issue.
Okay.
So you said that you mentioned two names, and I just.
But Jerry Carter's he's the CEO of NCAAS, and Davey McDowell, he is the COO, Chief Operating Officer. So those are the two top guys with NCAAS.
Are you saying that they decided that they should not be on the Hill lobbying Congress, and that's because they feel they are
because it may jeopardize the 501c3
which
status.
is a charity status?
Exactly.
Is that the same as the Red Cross?
It probably is, yeah, 501c3.
They lobby every day of the year. I'm just curious as to why we think we shouldn't.
Well, but do they lobby through that, or do they have a an arm that lobbies for them?
I'm just curious. I mean, there's got to be a way. Lots of.
I know I serve on a chamber board, and I know we're not allowed to lobby, and we actually formed a foundation and some other things to kind of do that for us. So I know we try to be real careful with not losing that.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Nonprofit status.
I'm just saying that there's, just to the casual observer, there's entities out there that are equal with regard to nonprofit status who spend a lot of money influencing legislation on their behalf. How they do it and how they get away with it and how they keep their status, I don't really necessarily know, which is why I was asking who made the decision, because maybe that's something that should be bubbled up to a formal type of policy relative to how we go about having adequate representation at the national level on issues that I think, the first time Robert ever told me his opinion about licensure going away one day, and I was like, oh man, you think about big things. I don't think about things like that. So, but it's real. I mean, those are the bigger issues are the ones that the bigger organizations on behalf of the rest of us have to tackle. So I'm just curious if that is that been decided? Boom, we're not going to do that, or is that just something that off the cuff you were mentioning as an anecdotal information?
I just know that discussion came up at one of our board meetings, and it was discussed. The NCAAS does not get involved in any type of lobbying whatsoever because of that 501c3 status, and that's the reason they support the various other societies, so they can do the lobbying on behalf of all the profession as far as engineers and surveyors. So that's I can't answer any.
Okay. I was just curious. I'm still learning. So,
I think about 10 years ago there was discussion about NCAAS opening a branch office in Washington D.C. and I remember that issue came up at that time that to preserve their nonprofit status they didn't need to engage in lobbying efforts, because obviously that would be the primary motive behind opening an office there.
But a couple of years ago, NCAAS wanted to do a foundation, and I guess use some of this money that they had, for that foundation for some scholarships and do some other things with it. But the attorney said absolutely not. You can't do that. A nonprofit cannot have a foundation. A nonprofit can't have another nonprofit in their portfolio. Exactly. A lot of these things come from a lot of these issues are addressed, in the interim meetings of the zones, and those motions are thought about and supported, and then it's brought to the floor at the annual meeting, and you guys drive that ship. So you get enough folks on your side, whatever the decision is what it will be. So.
And I'm gonna say something. This is a very personal. As much. I thought, what's the connect here? But it really does. And Robert's helped me see that attending. I don't find the organization to be nimble enough. I think we are in a culture where change is swifter than it used to be. And as an observer, and I'm not a member of a committee, so shame on me, but as an observer of the process through the zone and the meetings and getting it to the floor, I don't find the organization to be particularly nimble for change. And so that would be just one thing I'm kind of putting out there. If we can work on is to be a little bit more direct in the change. If there are changes that need to happen, let's make them happen. So that's my feedback to the board.
Well, and I'll be writing a report back to the board of my meeting here, and I'll certainly put that in it.
So that's not this board. So I know that all the organizations for which I'm on the board have to be a lot more nimble than we were previously.
Well, and like this issue, it's going to come up with, the multiple boards having more than one vote. There'll be a lot of discussion about that. I don't know how that'll work out or how that'll pass. And it may pass, but the way the resolution was written, then it's going to go to the bylaws committee. Right. Of course, that could, who knows where that'll end up going, but.
And I know there's some talk with the finance committee being on every,
There's a lot of working parts. I mean, I learned. There are a lot of working parts.
Yeah.
Every time I go to a board meeting, I learn something new. So anyway, again,
lots of good work being done by a lot of people that have, like you said, have day jobs. Exactly. Anybody else have any other questions for Roy? Back. I think it's a good
Don, thank you for
Thank you.
taking care of me. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your input. That was very helpful
I
on
was,
all
I was glad to
all
help.
that we were doing. Okay. Does anybody need to take a 5-minute break before we go into unfinished business? I was like, yes, Mark, yes. Okay, let's do that. Let us go for. Let's come back at 3:15 at the latest. Okay.
Robert,
Okay.
you, Kathy,
Steve.
Steve.
Okay, thank you. And we need to. Okay, thank you.
I'll keep you posted on that.
Let me know as quick as possible. I'll get you the other information about, we'll get
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. Thank you very much. Wanda clarified something for me on one of our applications. Mr. Deal's commitment, I guess it's a consent order, whatever it was, to pay off his taxes he has done so. So the way the motion was reading, or the way we made the motion was that we would renew his license, give him, approve the application pending that, so we don't need to change the motion. I just want to let y'all know.
So I can go ahead and sign then, so he's done.
Yes, yes, you can. The only thing we have between us and the Predators winning tonight is unfinished business. So the proposed changes to EAC ABET criteria. And I'm assuming John.
Sure, I can comment on that. That's on page 18.
I can't find my pages.
And you've reviewed this, before. This was discussed at the last meeting, and you had asked Mr. Bursey to write a letter from the committee addressing your concerns about the proposed changes to the EAC, not ETAC, but EAC ABET criteria. So page, page 18, you do have that letter that he drafted, which I think summarizes what your concerns were as expressed at the last meeting. And behind that, you do have the proposed changes as well if you want to review that information. And I did contact the schools of engineering in the state, the deans, asking for their comments on the criteria. I sent the criteria to them, asked for their feedback, and I only heard from one institution. I got a comment from Vanderbilt University, from Dr. Overholzer, their senior associate dean, and he actually was involved in making these proposed changes, so he was, not surprisingly, supportive of them. That's the only comment I received. I haven't heard from any other institutions. But Chris was telling me during the break that ASCE has expressed opposition to some of the changes. Correct. Okay.
What
I think for some
action
of the
do we
same
need to
reasons.
take?
Well, if you agree with this letter, then you can vote to, I guess, accept this draft and to authorize me to, I guess, send it to ABET, because their comment period is still open, so I could submit this as comments from the engineer committee of the board. Yeah, not the whole board, just from the engineer committee.
Does anybody have any questions of John?
John, I read the letter. I think it was captured what we had said. So, I think I would like to make a motion that we send it on behalf of the engineering committee.
Second? Any discussion?
Do you want me to sign it on behalf of the committee?
Not on
and
behalf
just-
of us, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
I'll do
fine.
it that way then.
Does anybody have any comments? Chris, is there anything substantive to what ASCE is objecting that would be important to us to know before we approve? It looks like we've got a motion to approve this letter.
I don't think.
No, we've got it.
Their position on ASCE's.
It would be helpful, yeah.
If you could come to the microphone, Chris. If you could come to the microphone.
Now, to be
reconsider.
clear, our letter is to indicate that we are concerned, and what I'm hearing is that ASCE is as well. Is that correct? Am I connecting the dots right?
From the chair of the Engineering Accreditation, from James O'Brien, Managing Director of Professional and Educational Activities from ASCE. So it's their feedback of the proposed changes. The purpose of this letter is to provide the input of ASCE's Committee on Accreditation regarding the proposed changes to EAC Criteria 3 and 5. ASCE's Committee on Accreditation strongly supports the EAC's overall intent of assessing and updating Criteria 3 and 5, given that the Criteria 3 outcomes were originally formulated over 2 decades ago. A systematic upgrade is certainly warranted. We also expect that once the ongoing revision is completed, another systematic update is unlikely to occur for at least another decade. As such, we believe critical that the ongoing process focus not only on addressing problems with the existing Criteria 3 outcomes, but also focus on addressing the extent to which Criteria 3 reflects the future needs of engineering profession. In preparing this feedback, the Committee on Accreditation has considered the EAC Criteria Committee's stated intent to clarify outcomes that historically programs have difficulty assessing allow more efficient assessment processes, emphasizing applications in engineering content, and add some elements of project management. The latter intended to align ABET criteria more closely with Washington Accord graduate attributes referencing project management and finance. And my battery's about dead, so I might have to skip to the
Okay.
to the end to make sure you get that.
Yeah, get the gist.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll kind of summarize this. They're somewhat concerned about the fact that this will throw some of the programs into somewhat of a state of confusion, because changing the criteria that's been around for 20 years could cause some problems for not only the schools but also for the people that come in and do the accreditation reviews on campus. To them, it's not readily apparent how the proposed changes will improve engineering education in any meaningful way. I missed the paragraph on where they... okay, so based on the detailed review and more importantly on the board's strategic issues presented in paragraph 6 below, we cannot support the proposed changes to criterion 3 and 5. One of the things I have the chair at the University of Evansville, where I worked for 20 years. I asked him for his comments on this, and I found out that he is actually on ABET's EAC committee, and he's also on ASCE's Body of Knowledge committee. So his take on it, and he gave me a very long dissertation on why they proposed the changes, and it corresponds somewhat to the ASCE's Body of Knowledge document. But then it also addresses the fact that should some programs want to lower their degree requirements, for example, below 120, that the way the ABET wording is now, that it's 32 hours of math and science, or 25% of the total degree requirements. Okay, so right now, if you have 120 hours, 25% of that would be 30 hours. So it's the lesser of, so it'd be 32 or 30. So if they drop below 120, it'd be actually drop below 30, which is what they're proposing. And the same thing with the engineering courses, it's 45 hours or whatever that percentage would be. Yeah, so it's actually one of the things that they're trying to address is the fact that if we continue to lower and lower and lower the number of hours required for a degree, that we don't continue to lower and lower and lower the math and science hours and the engineering course hours. So at least this proposed changes is based on 30 and 40, 45. I can't remember the numbers. But anyway, it's based on a 120-hour degree. Yeah. And evidently, some of the foreign programs that ABET now evaluates actually have a 96-hour degree requirement. Some of the European countries, I think, will have. You can get a degree in 3 years. Of course, there's a lot of the education that we do in our universities actually takes place in their high school. So, yeah, so we're kind of not comparing apples to apples. Although ABET is trying to make it easier on themselves, I think, to be able to say, here's the rules, it applies to everybody. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion on the table. Any other questions or discussion?
I'm curious about, there's a comment in the letter about in the future, engineers would be required to have a 3-year degree. Where did that come from?
I think they're calculating from the number of hours. Isn't that right? The 96 and the.
Is that why did we mention that? Is that proposed, or is that just a?
It is a bit dramatic, the statement.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It is a little.
That came from Dr.
You like it,
Smith,
though?
I think, originally
Okay.
in his comments. Yeah.
I like trauma, so I said.
Yeah.
But yeah, Doctor, it is from Dr. Smith's list.
That's right. I remember that.
Are we ready to vote? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is review of criteria for fulfillment of humanities, social sciences, general education deficiencies, and that is
23. And this is the policy. I think y'all have been talking about this for all year so far. And I just took some of the revisions y'all discussed at the last meeting and added them to the policy here so you can see the changes made. And I think this accurately reflects what you discussed at the last meeting, but I think it's on page 23, 26. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, the summary's on 26.
page, it's
It's number 26 at the bottom.
Yeah, numbered 26.
essentially we've added the technical paper, presentations, and teaching.
We had already raised the number of hours for U.S. citizenship to 3, so you voted on that actually at the April meeting. So
When you say deficiencies of less than 3 hours semester credit may be waived by the board, tell me again where the 3 comes from, just because that.
course credit.
So should it be equal to or less than then?
No, because equal to, I mean, that would be one course. Usually if it's less than the credit you would receive for a course.
So the intent
Then you
is
would
that
waive
if it's less than one
Yeah,
course.
so 1 or 2 credits, if that's all they're lacking, then that would be waived. 3 or more, they would have to remedy the deficiency typically.
Does then that mean that if it's 4 hours, we can't waive it? Did that today.
Expensive, maybe waived.
We
but-
did that today. We waived a 3-hour.
Mhm. Yeah, you still have the discretion to waive anything, I think.
We waived the 3 hour because we waived it because we said he had an equivalent in nuclear.
Right.
He had 30 more, he had 30 hours.
Right, but if this sentence is, all I'm asking is if this sentence, does that mean that it has to be less than 3 hours or do we have the 12 hours?
So we maintain all the flexibility.
I'm
So
just
it's
not sure you need
not
to-
a rule. This is just yeah, guidelines is a good way to put it.
Right, I'm just saying, why put the
No,
sentence in, yeah.
Well, to provide historical
guidance,
precedent.
yeah.
Because
Okay.
we've always said.
That makes
It's
sense.
an easy waive if it's 1 to 2 hours.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions other than Laura? For John on this? And this too, we need to vote on, John, at this point?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve it as presented.
Second. It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? I believed that is the end of the agenda. Anything else? Any other new
Oh,
or old business?
next
Oh, I'm sorry, we
page.
got more? I'm sorry.
There's a second page.
Oh, there we go. I knew I was leaving something out because it doesn't say adjournment. Electronic seals, of course.
Oh, Robert.
Okay, no,
Have any update other
Yeah.
than what you've already told us?
quick thing on it. So the way Florida does it, there's basically 3 ways that you can seal a document. Number 1, ink, stamp, sign, hand sign. Number 2 is an electronic sealing process where every sheet is stamped electronically, which is a verified electronic seal. So you go in, log in, boom. The third way is you seal the entire electronic file. So you don't seal each sheet, you seal the entire file. There's issues with that when you're talking to building officials who are used to seeing a seal on each sheet, those kind of things. But your larger organizations who are used to handling their own document control may want to opt for that to happen, and that's kind of what we're discussing with TDOT. So when you seal the entire file, once they print those sheets out, like again, this is according to the Florida law, they become the owner of those sheets, not the registrant, because you as a registrant can't control your electronic file. Once somebody prints it out, they can slide sheet number 2, sheet number 3. You're only signing the electronic file. So again, it's a document control issue from their standpoint. And Florida's law basically says you take ownership of it at that point. And that's something we'll have more discussions on once we kind of see which direction this is headed. Florida's put a lot of time, effort, and they've got an entire presentation, about 90 pages, that they have their registrants go through. They seem to indicate that there's no real issues because primarily it's their big users that are doing that. It's their TDOTs and larger municipalities that are used to dealing with, have technical staff and that kind of stuff. We presented to Knox County the other day, the local jurisdiction, just to kind of talk and see what issues they had. I think they would be, the city of Knoxville would be able to handle stuff like that for certain type of projects because they've got enough technical staff, people to support that. I think somebody like smaller county, smaller codes may have issues with that we would, but they would need to be something they decided on. But I think as we go forward, we'll present more information. Meeting with TDOT tomorrow to kind of see what direction they're heading as well. And we'll make some more formal presentations as we get closer to something for us to look at.
Anything update on the energy service companies?
I know we've looked into kind of how that area practices, and I think that there is a legitimate concern that some of these firms may be operating under the definition of an engineer. However, at this point, we would really need, in order for the agency, for legal really, to take the extra steps to investigate where it wouldn't come off as a sweeping action, we would need most likely to take the next step. But I do think it's a legitimate industry to keep an eye on, especially in light of in looking at some of these firms, it's very apparent that that's what they are doing. They are practicing engineering in the context of which subsects can be applicable to energy conservation. Some of the firms we look at do have PEs on staff, but we just don't understand how they're structured as far as supervision goes. One of the things that we did learn from the organization that does accredit these individuals is that they require you to hold a PE in your jurisdiction before they give you that accreditation. So the upside is the association that is of the energy engineers. John, what is that association that? They require a PE. So the upside is anyone with that accreditation should be a PE with this board. The question becomes people who are not through that association but are still calling themselves energy engineers. What is their role? So if we received a complaint, I think at this point we would feel comfortable investigating that and looking into it and maybe using that as an example, go to the administration and kind of look at taking broader action. I think that's where we are. We haven't necessarily. Oh yeah, Casey, do you want to?
Did you look up? Are they registered in Tennessee? All of those people, or because I looked about a year ago.
Only had one firm that was presented to us as someone that maybe was registered in Tennessee, but they did have associates under them that still had the title, at least on the website, of being energy engineers. What their relationship is with that PE, we don't know. And at this point, I was a little hesitant to take too many steps to start poking and investigating without further authority. So I didn't want it to come off like a fishing expedition, if you will, since as legal, I really am only empowered through a complaint. So I think if the board and staff like to look into it more, that might be one option, but for legal, we'd probably need a complaint.
So, yeah, to clarify that the staff can open a complaint.
That's correct.
Right, we can.
And
So
board
if you
members
felt
can.
like legal had discerned that there might be an issue to the extent that you would open a complaint, you could do that.
Right, that's correct.
Is that the situation here?
I think that's where we're starting to look at. I wanted to talk to the reason, just to be frank on why I'm hesitant, I think why we're all hesitant, is we don't want to spark off any sort of, we're taking broad sweeping action towards an agency, like an area that could be foreseen as, we don't want to parallel ourselves to North Carolina Dental. Obviously, I think that there's some distinction here because I think that we've done enough initial investigation to say, do we think this is engineering? Most likely in some of these scenarios. But we're trying to John and I have been talking, and we've been trying to be very cautious of how we approach this to make sure that we have the support of the administration and of the board at moving forward. But within we've been trying to be a little cautious, to be honest, but I definitely think if the board is in a place where they'd like us to take a step forward, we can look into some of these project they may be working on and use that to look.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we see, we've been on websites before, people giving complaints, and we've acted on those. You know, legal use of title. You didn't have somebody registered in the state of Tennessee for your disclosure form or something. So I think that's certainly something we need to do. And what I was struck again by the Southern Zone meeting, there are other states that really actively go out and do enforcement issues, and to the point where they have, and I think it's maybe Alabama, I mean, they've got people that show up at building inspectors' offices and go through the plans and look to see if, you know, are there issues with these plans? Is the registrant there? Well, I mean, but hey, that's, you know, that's something that maybe we need to think about long term as a board, because we talk about protecting the health, safety, and welfare. They actually go in there and say, you know, this person stamped every sheet. This person is not even registered in the state of Alabama. Or this, I'm just saying, there are other states that are doing it different than us, and it's causing them no sleepless nights. So I don't know.
Well, those are generally independent autonomous
I understand.
boards like Alabama, where they have their own investigative staff, and of course we're under an umbrella agency, so there is a difference in how we operate. Certainly, we have a pool of investigators that handle complaints for, multiple programs, right? So they don't have is the level of expertise that an investigator that solely works for an engineering board would have. So yeah, there's some challenges to us taking that approach.
I think we've been very fortunate too in that the fire inspectors have worked, I think, pretty diligently with us to, when they do notice those sorts of issues, they'll have a letter signed and notify staff. In fact, many of our complaints have come from codes related to fire safety, and then them noticing multiple stamp disciplines. So you're right, Robert. I think there is more aggressive actions that can be taken and are taken in other states, and we definitely want to look into ways that we can do that within the structure that we have, whether that's using fire marshals more.
The genesis of this, though, was from a board member.
Right.
I mean, I think if we have this from a board member raising the question, and legal has raised the question, it strikes me that we're at the point where maybe that's an appropriate complaint opening scenario. If only to educate ourselves further.
I was going to ask too, if it was your pleasure to remove this as a standing item on the agenda, or now that we've decided we're definitely going to have to address it through the complaint process, that would be the appropriate venue, then maybe we don't need to keep it on the agenda. Been on there a long time, probably.
And to that point, I mean, I think it's something we've been looking at.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. Well, thank you. Thanks for all your work on this, because
It was really interesting, honestly.
well, and I know that it's been we've been tenacious in trying to find it. Last one is decoupling, which we've talked about. Is there anything more that we need to discuss on decoupling? I know that was probably covered in what we talked about with Commissioner Lawrence. To be clear, I guess, and concise, I think what we ended with is that if there is some action to be taken, that
Registrants need to tell us there's an issue.
Yeah. Lots of moving parts on this, so we want to make sure that collaboration and consensus is what we achieve. Any other old business? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. All right. See y'all tomorrow.
Rich.
After the big.
Oh, yes, there
yes,
is.
you do.
Oh, always
Indeed.
statement.
Do.
There it is. And I'll do your roll call after you read your statement. It's going to be in.
Okay, let's get this meeting started. Are we ready? Thank you. This regularly scheduled meeting of the Landscape Architect Committee of the Board of Architectural and Engineering Examiners is taking place 1B of the Davy Crockett Tower at 500 James Robertson Parkway in Nashville, Tennessee. And notice of this committee meeting was posted on the board website on May 22nd, 2017.
Roll call. Robert Campbell.
Present.
Blair Parker.
Present?
Frank Waxter. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. We have what appears to be one item on our agenda today, and that is to discuss the continuing education and health, safety, and welfare requirement for landscape architecture. I'll begin just by saying I'm amazed by how many people call me from time to time asking if a certain education opportunity is HSW related, and I defer from even commenting on that, other than to say if I attended it and if I feel like it may be, then I will tell them that I will be submitting it as such. But I really don't get into that. I don't feel like that's my position to do that. The way that our Tennessee law reads, as I understand it, is up to us as individual registrants to make that decision. And where I'm very cautious is how I document my the classes, courses, whatever that I take, and making sure I keep up with that during our every year. It's very so, and it also surprises me how often at the end of the year I receive phone calls from people who say, do you know of any courses coming up here by December 31 that we can take? So not all of us are organized, and I'm thankful to be so. But in the end, I think we all are very concerned about keeping up to date with the newest rules and so on in our profession of landscape architecture. And that is likewise with engineering and architecture. As there are a few things, I suppose, that I would eventually like to discuss with the overall board, but the interpretation of health, safety, and welfare, I believe, is very important to us filling out our forms and submitting them to staff on an annual basis. But the interpretation of health, safety, and welfare, that right now is really up to the individual registrant. So as landscape architect in the state, we rely on the American Society of Landscape Architects Tennessee chapter to provide a list of education opportunities, and many times those are actually provided by ASLA. And when they do so, they provide a form that will state what the name of the it was, and how many hours it was, and its relevance to the section of health, safety, and welfare. ASLA has a form that they fill out. Robert, you have a copy of that form, and in discussion with John, I did not realize that there was also a form prepared by the state of Tennessee. So on the flip side, that's the landscape architecture, the ASLA form, and that is the state of Tennessee form. And I understand was prepared in the past when somebody submits something to the state of Tennessee and staff does not believe it's thorough enough or provides enough information, then this form may be sent back to an individual registrant and have them complete that to help staff make those decisions. I think it's a great idea. The information on both of these is actually very close to each other. And I could just encourage all landscape architects to use either one of these forms to complete and to verify and to, I suppose, document the courses that they take. But looking at these two forms, there's one item on the one prepared by the state that I really like. It's point blank, HSW accrued in hours. On the landscape architecture ASLA form, it asks for a written paragraph that says, explain the activity's applicability and relevance to the protection of health, safety, and welfare of the public. That's a great question, and it's a great place to add that information. But it needs to be on both forms, and it is in just two different ways. So I believe both of these forms are good, solid forms. I would like to review this form prepared by the state, and I know that the Tennessee ASLA has been in contact and said that they are supportive of us reviewing PDH requirements and supportive of documentation. but we don't know what that means exactly. So we need to discuss this and work this through. But I really like the forms that we already have, and I'm not sure from the engineering, on the engineering side, what the engineers normally do.
Well, I mean, the engineers, we look for obviously certificates, and we don't have a spelled out health, safety, and welfare list either. I mean, that's something we discussed here just a little while ago, a definition, if you will. So, but we do use this form from time to time. We use, certificate, the description, and the attendance there to verify, like I'm sure you all do, and they come in different forms. So they'll come from NSP. Different organizations will provide that. We don't have providers as well. I don't know that we are at the point either on the engineering side of coming up with a definition of health, safety, and welfare. I just think it's tough to get there because you can make so many things can be health, safety, and welfare. I mean, you can really, you can pretty much make everything into health, safety, and welfare hour that you want to. So these forms are, I mean, I would encourage landscape architects to, I mean, I think your information's good here on this ASLA form if that's what they want to use. I like, I think Hal was the one that kind of developed most of this and tried to make it to where it was fairly simple to fill out and you didn't have to go through a lot, because you've already got the information once, don't repeat everything. So I think if you're doing it for the first time, this form makes a lot of sense because it lets you spell out some stuff. But do you all have certificates? I mean, when you go to class, you get a certificate, don't you?
That would be the certificate.
Okay,
That's an individual certificate at each
I got you.
class you would go to.
Okay. Ours are just more, here's the course, here's what it's about, and here's the certificate thing. So, I mean, from a form standpoint, I'm fine. Are you trying to develop a HSW definition on any level?
I've discussed it with individuals, and no, we have not actually gone to that level of trying to define HSW. Okay. I agree. It's a very difficult thing. I have thought about it. I think I've thought it through fairly thoroughly, and it's a very difficult thing to really come up with. And interestingly, in landscape architecture, we take courses that may come from the engineering side, what most people believe is the engineering side of the world, and oftentimes from the architectural side. We have planning courses that are certainly relevant in landscape architecture. So from those different perspectives, we don't always receive a form of a certificate of attendance. Most times we do. Matter of fact, I believe most of those that I've attended that come from the engineering side, I almost always receive a certificate.
And the architecture ones, I think, they're all pre-approved courses, right?
So,
I mean,
yes.
most of and they spell out what they go for. So I just think that not having a definition is probably better off because I think you limit some opportunities maybe down the road, or you opens up to saying, well, you're picking this person's but not this person. I would just make the documentation is the big deal. I mean, all my young engineers that come in, one of the first things I show them when they get licensed is copy your license. Every course you take, you put it with it, you put a paper clip around it, and when your license renewal comes, you put another one in there, you put those others with it, and that way when you need to look for 2017, you pull out the 2017 pile, and there it is, and you don't all of them have a drawer. So I think that's the bigger deal is just organization and knowing that how close you are. Yes. I think that's the thing. Are you having a lot of opportunity for classes?
Absolutely.
And that's what I would think. I mean, I saw ADS there. I mean, we're always getting something from vendors and things. Hey, let us show you our new whiz bang, whatever. So I would think that's part.
in landscape architecture specific to ASLA, Tennessee ASLA is broken into three different sections, if you will: east section, middle, and west. And each of those sections organize education opportunities. And when they do, when they're the ones who organize that, they always require this form be completed. Matter of fact, this form is provided to the presenter first, and ASLA will make a decision whether or not they believe it's a worthy presentation for landscape architects. And seldom do they tell us, though, that it will be a health, safety, and welfare type. You have to make that decision on your own. I would, for them to tell us it's HSW, then there we go again with that opinion as to your definition of HSW versus my definition of HSW. So I think maybe.
But I would feel, I mean, I would say this. How many people are looking at this? How many people on ASLA are there, like 2, 3, 4? I mean, how many people are looking at this when they give approval or not approval?
What, I mean,
one person, or is it, I mean.
No, there's a small committee.
That's what I'm saying. I would think one person it may be, but if a group of 3 people look at it and say, yeah, that's HSW, I think you're in pretty safe ground when you got a committee that looks at it and says, yeah, we think this is 3 hours of HSW versus one person saying that. I mean,
Exactly.
You know, if this was just one person making the decision, I think I agree. But if it's a committee, John, I mean, you know, when you've got 3 or 4 people, 5 people looking at it, if they all come pretty much to the same conclusion, then I think it's going to be hard to say that's wrong. One person, you can pretty easy.
The other items for discussion would be the quantity, the amount of HSW hours. Currently, engineering and landscape architecture, I believe we're required to have 7 of our 12. Does that sound correct?
Oh, it's for if you report 24 hours, 13 have to be HSW, and if it's your first renewal after your license is issued, then you report 12 hours total, 7 of which are HSW related. We used to say just a majority, but then people didn't understand what a majority was. They had difficulty calculating that, so then we spelled out the number of hours required instead of saying majority. Yeah.
At our last board meeting, we raised the question as to whether we would want to increase that amount or not. So I started asking around, and I never heard anything negative from any landscape architect I spoke to about increasing the amount of health, safety, and welfare hours to be required. That's not to say people agreed that every single hour should be, but nobody really had a problem with increasing the amount. And I'm curious on the architectural and interior design, or architectural side, or interior design side, because I believe that they have an alternate HSW or continuing education.
They can report their hours if they choose on a calendar year basis through their alternative rule provision. But if they choose that option, then all their hours have to address health, safety, welfare issues. That's where the idea came from. Should we require for all professions that all hours be HSW related?
Robert, is this was this a point of discussion at the engineering meet?
We talked more about definition of HSW, I think, than we did. We decided to go all HSW, though. I'm getting my.
No, y'all had decided that you did not want all the hours to be HSW.
That's what I'm saying, but I mean,
keep it a majority.
Yeah, we talked about, but I mean, our discussion was more on defining HSW than it was on the number. The majority of our discussion was that, I thought. So I got confused on that one from the beginning, but does it make you a better landscape architect if they're all HSW or not? I don't know that it makes me a better engineer if they're all HSW. Okay, I mean, that's the point of continuing education, is to keep up with new trends and stuff. And we looked at it and said, you know, there's all kinds of things that change in this world that we need to be up to date on to be better at our professions. You know, how do you use your phone effectively to transmit files? Well, you know, that's stupid, right? I mean, that's not really an HSW, but the communication of data, the effective communication of data is important. Now, is it an health, safety, and welfare? Well, maybe it can be argued as a welfare, but probably, strictly speaking, a communication class is not going to be an HSW thing. So, but it's important to know how to do that. It's important to know how your ideas are getting transmitted. It's important to know other things besides HSW. So I don't see that it's making you a better landscape architect to have them all HSW, just like I don't think it's making me a better engineer to have them all. Architects, as we discussed, have got their own reason for doing that because it's part of the way they're, the safety part, health and safety part is more ingrained in their licensure or their education stuff. So I just don't see how it makes you a better landscape architect.
I agree with that. But I do believe we have to have some.
100%
for
agree
sure.
with that.
And, you know, maybe the majority is plenty, majority of the hour.
I think you could make the point that all of them are if you really want to. I mean, seriously, I mean, you can.
Most times you can. I agree.
What do you want to do? Since you're the only practicing landscape architect on this committee, I will defer to you.
Well, I do not believe that having 100% health, safety, and welfare hours is necessary. I don't think it's needed. Having the majority makes sense. I could even see bumping it up a little bit from there because I believe as a board what we want is the majority of continuing education licensed for. That's what it's all about. And having the majority, if we have the majority, if we have 13 hours of 24 in a 2-year period, a lot of non-HSW hours in there in that time. So my opinion is we should probably have more than just the majority. That would be my opinion. Now, what that number is, back and make a recommendation.
I think I'm on board with that too. I just, if you think that helps increase the profile of the HSW hours with your registrants, if you think that it makes it to where they're more cognizant of that, then I think that's certainly a very legitimate reason to do it. But if you think most of the hours you're getting now, the super majority of the hours you're getting now are HSW anyway, then you're really only raising the 2 or 3 that try to skim off the bottom, and they've got their own issues. But I certainly agree with what you're saying.
I agree with that, and for the vast majority of times, I will not attend an education event if it is not HSW, unless it is maybe something like you're talking about, but certainly wouldn't have, even 7 or 8, 9 hours of non-HSW. I look for the HSW type, and I would hope that most landscape architects would do that. But we know how that goes sometimes.
Well, I mean,
it doesn't always happen. Yeah. As a person who makes public presentations, I use my words sometimes to convince or to describe why I'm here and the projects I'm putting before a board, and craft an idea about HSW in a lot of different ways. And it's like you're saying, the majority of times when you attend an education event, you can write a description of why it was HSW. But it may not, in a 50-minute period of time, they may have touched on, the presenter may have touched on 2 or 3 items that may have lasted 10 minutes, but certainly.
But there's a lot of people in the state of Tennessee that if they ever put my dad down as a reference for a continuing education credit, only got about 15 minutes worth of engineering. They got 45 minutes worth of story. So, I mean, it's, I think that has to do sometimes with how the presenters are and things that go along. But I think it's the conscious effort to make people say, I've got to go learn more is the real focus behind the continuing education world. And sometimes you get it in a class, sometimes you don't, but you're at least moving in that direction. And I think that's the important part of it.
Yes, I agree. I would like to continue this discussion at our next board meeting, and I will actually have a recommendation as to whether or not we leave it at the majority or possibly increase the amount.
Want to schedule another landscape architect committee meeting for the August, or just do it as part of the continuing education committee discussion? We could.
I think it belongs with the continuing education committee.
Okay, because we already have a meeting scheduled in August for the continuing ed committee, so we can just do it at that time. Okay.
Very good.
Is there anything else? Discuss at this time?
Do you want to mention it's going to be discussed at the October meeting, I guess, but the issue about the experience requirement for landscape architect applicants, 2 years versus 3 years under the supervision of a landscape architect?
Yes.
You might want to mention that.
Well, I have discovered, John may have already, I'm sure John already knew this, that the Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Boards, CLARB, is their recommendation is that a registrant have 3 years and 3 years experience before they can become licensed. In the state of Tennessee, I was always told that we had a 3-year requirement as well, but that's in fact not true. In the state of Tennessee, we have a 2-year requirement.
Under the supervision
under
of
the supervision,
landscape
that's right,
architect,
of a landscape
right.
architect. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's a discrepancy between what the state of Tennessee requires than what CLARB recommends. And I'm wondering, is that something that we should shore up and make the two the same? CLARB does things for the most part. Do we need to think this through and possibly make a rule change at Tennessee? Or are we fine with it as a 2-year requirement?
I'll tell you from our standpoint, so I think there's 2 reasons you should. Number one, I just think let's stop just a second. I think the reason the 2-year was in there was because there was probably a lack of landscape architecture at schools and professionals in the past. Now that Tennessee is graduating more, I think there's 1 or 2 more landscape architecture programs in the last 10 years or so, and I know at 1, but I may be 2. I think you have more exposure. Is it 1 or 2? 1. Okay, I thought there were 2, but no, anyway. But you got more now than you did when this rule was written. So you have more opportunity for people to work with landscape architects longer that are licensed. Second thing is, I think from a mobility standpoint, if you start to differ from what CLARB is having on something that's really not a huge deal, then it may make it harder for people to go in different places longer term to be able to do that work. And I think that's what we've seen on the engineering side is we've got so many little pieces and parts, and some of them are really important and some of them are really not. But they set up these little barriers sometimes to keep us from And I mean, one of the things is some states, I think, have an order about when you have to do certain things. So, right? I mean, some of them say you have to have the education, then you have to have this, and before you can get comity. Well, that limits the people that can do that. Ours is open. It says you just got to have it. It's not got an order prescribed to it. Well, I mean, that sounds like something that would be fairly simple to fix, which would open up the ability to do comedy easier. And so while you're in the process of this, if that's something that potentially could be a barrier, which it sounds like it could, I would knock that down now while some of this licensure stuff still in landscape architecture is relative in its infancy. I mean, it's not, but it is compared to some of the others a little bit more, and the body is not as spread out. Because once the body gets spread out and everything gets moving, it's harder to bring things back in line. I mean, that's my opinion.
John, I don't believe we've ever seen the conflict between the CLARB requirement and Tennessee's requirement yet at this point. Not that you're aware of.
I don't think it's ever posed a barrier to anyone because CLARB still has other avenues to become certified. If you don't have the 3 years under the supervision of a landscape architect, they'll accept experience obtained in different settings. I think up to 2 years could be supervised by an architect or an engineer, civil engineer specifically. So that there's other avenues to obtain a certificate without that 3 years under a landscape architect. But the gold standard is definitely 3 years under a landscape architect. That's the preference.
And I just think as you get more more accredited programs and stuff, I think it may become a bigger deal later on. I mean, maybe in 20 years, 30 years, but I mean, it's still, I would go, if it's not going to create a problem now, go ahead and make it match up now and not fight the battle later on.
Yet for years, we did not have a school of landscape architecture in the state for a long, long time. So everybody who practices in the state, everybody who did at the time had to come be educated somewhere else where their rules may be totally different. So I like the idea of matching up with CLARB, and I will be looking into that. The CLARB meeting is coming up later on this year. There's a lot going on with CLARB's model law and so on. So I'll do my homework on that, and I will also come back and
we'll discuss it at the retreat in October.
It's interesting when you talk to landscape architects, they will tell you that yes, they have to have 3 years experience under a registered LA. I've never heard anybody say anything different. So
yeah.
At least out in the public, myself included, until now, I thought it was a 3-year requirement.
I can't remember what prompted us to look into that. I guess it was it was a question. I remember now. I had gotten a question from an applicant. Do I need 2 years under an LA or 3 years? Because they looked at the law and they weren't sure what the requirement was. And yeah, in the past we had always just kind of assumed, oh, it's 3 years, like you said, Blair. But then when we looked at it closely, had our attorneys look at it, they were like, well, technically it's really 2 years under an LA in the law. But they said we could clarify by rule if we need to. If you wanted to require that we could require 3 years under the supervision of a landscape architect.
Off the cuff, I like that idea, that matching up with CLARB, and that way there would never be any question, in particular with people who come in from out of state. So
that's probably where the because like you said, most of the people were educated somewhere else, and it was probably already native in their law to have three years. So they probably just brought that from other places, or people had told them that from other places, and that's when they.
And then also under the statute, section 801 and 803, if you weren't familiar with what you were looking at or looking for the specifics, seem to contradict each other. So it does say 3 years of practical experience is required in the first section, but that isn't supervised, it's just experience. And then you have to go down 2 sections to say, oh, no, 2 of those must be supervised. So I think that's probably where our registrant got confused looking at the statute.
Yeah, he was referring to those statutes. He's like, well, is it 2 or is it 3? It wasn't clear to him, so we had to look into it. I'm surprised it hadn't come up in the past.
I agree, because I was even confused when you brought it up looking at it.
So is that written in such a way that we should clean that up, if nothing else, clean that up in the future?
The statute, it does distinguish between supervision, and we're lucky, I think I would say, to say that the 2-year experience says that no less than, which I think will allow us to just through our own rulemaking process, rather than having to go to the General Assembly, be able to make a rule that says we say no less than 2, or so we mean 3. You know, so I think we're going to definitely check with that, and Liz has been looking into it, but we believe a rulemaking would be sufficient and would help clarify.
Sounds good. I will come back. I will do more homework on that, and I will be back to the Landscape Architecture Committee for further discussion.
Hopefully there'll be more.
3 instead of 2.
All right, do we have any further discussion? Other items?
That's all of our committees for this meeting.